All right, you ready to go?
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Agriculture, Conservation, and Forestry Committee meeting. I am Senator Jim Dill, and I am the Senate Chair. And we have several things this morning. We have from 11 to 12 a briefing on LD 519, impact of herbicides on school grounds, then followed by 3 public hearings. LD 626, an act to clarify temporary mooring privileges for moorings on inland water, LD 1942, an act to make changes to the state's hemp program. And finally, LD 1944, an act to provide the State Harness Racing Commission greater efficiency in rules enforcement. So with that, we will start with introductions, and I will start with Representative Bernard.
Good morning very much, Senator Dill, as well as the rest of Maine. I'm Sue Bernard, and I represent District Number 149. Me and my bird do that, the chickadee. And my district is Caribou, Westmoreland, and New Sweden. Good morning, everyone.
Representative Underwood.
Good morning. I'm Joseph Underwood, District 147, soon to be District 5, Presque Isle, and good morning, everybody.
House Chair O'Neill.
Good morning. I'm Maggie O'Neill. I represent House District 15, which is in Saco.
Representative Landry.
Good morning. I'm Scott Landry. I represent District 113, which includes the towns of Farmington and New Sharon.
Representative Osher.
Good morning. I'm Lori Osher. I represent District 123, and that's the University of Maine. And happy to see everyone today.
Representative Hall.
Good morning, Representative Randy Hall from Wilton, and I represent District 114, 6 towns in southern Franklin County.
Representative Schofield.
Good morning, everyone. My name's Tom Schofield, and I represent House District 112. I live in the town of Weld, and I represent 17 towns and townships in Franklin and Somerset counties, the High Peaks region of Maine.
Senator Maxman.
Hi, I'm Chloe Maxman. I represent Senate District 13, which is Lincoln County, Washington, and Windsor.
Senator Black.
Good morning, Russ Black from Wilton, representing Senate District 17, which is all of Franklin County and 4 towns in Kennebec, Belgrade, Mount Vernon, Vienna, and Fayette.
And again, I'm Senator Jim Dill. I represent District Number 5, Northern Penobscot County. And with that, before we start, we do have a brief message I have been told or asked to read by the President of the Senate, and it's about committee decorum. It says, good morning. I have the honor of serving as the chair of ACF committee. And before we begin our work today, I want to take a moment to thank all of you for your hard work so far this session. Serving in the Maine legislature on this committee can be extremely demanding and time consuming. While we may disagree on certain policy areas, I believe every member of this committee is deeply committed to serving their constituents and working in good faith to confront the issues that come before us. That being said, as we approach the halfway point of the legislative session, presiding officers have asked committee chairs to take a minute to remind both legislators and public participants that maintaining a decorum is vital to ensuring we can complete our work in an orderly and efficient manner. It's also important upholding the integrity of this committee. If you need a refresher, the rules of the procedure in committee are the same as the rules of procedure in both the Senate and House under the joint rules. In addition, the Maine Legislative Code of Ethics charges each legislator with civility and responsible conduct both inside and outside of the State House. Here's how this translates to our committee work. Committee members are required to show respect at all times for witnesses and for other committee members. All discussions must be conducted in a manner that's not disruptive. Impugning the motives of another committee member is prohibited. Engaging in the discussion of personalities of other members is prohibited. A committee chair has the power to limit testimony at public hearings as necessary for the orderly conduct of the hearing, and members shall refrain from interrogation that is argumentative, oppressive, repetitive, or unnecessarily embarrassing to hearing participants. In an effort to maintain order and decorum, all questions must be addressed through the chair. All speakers must be recognized by the chair. Questions relating to order are decided by the chair, subject to appeal by the committee. If a participant violates the rules of order and decorum, the chair can take action to limit the ability of the participant to continue disrupting a meeting or a public hearing. Republican, Democrat, Independent, or unenrolled, every single person who appears before this committee deserves respect, as do our esteemed colleagues who serve on the committee. I want to thank each of you for your efforts in helping us meet our duty of civility outlined in the legislative code of ethics and demanded by our constituents. Thank you. All right, with that, would you let in Megan Patterson, please, and then we'll get started in a second. Our analyst today is Karen Netto, and our clerk is Cheryl McGowan.
Here she comes.
Great. Where'd she go? Oh, there she is.
It's a little bit of a lag, so
Yep.
and also a lot of sunlight. So my apologies. The blind is fully closed. This is all I can do. And I did have Pam Breyer. Dr. Pam Breyer will be.
Okay.
He's
Yeah.
going
Would
to
you
be
let
here.
in Pam Breyer too, please?
Thanks.
There we go. I see her too. So good morning, Director Patterson. Go ahead and whenever you're ready to begin.
Sure. All right. Good morning, Senator Dill, Representative O'Neill, and members of the ACF committee. Thank you for inviting us here today to talk about the Medical Advisory Committee's report in response to LD 519, which is an act to protect children from toxic substances. So just by way of a little bit of a refresher, that bill essentially had two major provisions. The first was prohibition on application of glyphosate and dicamba within 75 feet of school grounds, with some limited exceptions to that pertaining to commercial agriculture, but also residential properties. The second provision of that bill pertained to convening the Medical Advisory Committee. So it was directing the Board of Pesticides Control, so that's the public member board, to convene its Medical Advisory Committee to evaluate the potential impact of herbicides used on school grounds on human health. And there was an expectation of a report back by February 1st of 2022. So you should have that report. I will say there's one small caveat to that. So the MAC was not able to meet again after its December meeting. So there are minutes that were not included in the report, but provided with the report that have not received final approval by the MAC members, but have been reviewed by the MAC members. So I just wanted you to have those so you'd have an idea of how that meeting proceeded and what the votes were, since many of those decisions reflect the content that was included in the final report, the interim report. So just to give you a sense of what the purpose of the MAC is. So it essentially originated in 2005. There's some statutory language. In essence, it originated in policy in 2008, but there's some statutory language in Title 7, 607A that talks about the review of pesticide registrations and the re-registration of pesticide products. And under that section, there's a section 2, subsection 2 review process that talks about BPC collaborating with other departments, different agencies within state government to conduct a review consisting of the following or portions of the following as the board determines relevant. So the first part of that describes the sort of foundation of an ERAC, or which is what we call it, but Environmental Risk Assessment Committee. The second part describes the foundation for a medical advisory committee and says a health risk assessment based on a literature search of laboratory, clinical, and epidemiological data available within and without the state. The board shall request data as it determines necessary to carry out the purpose of this chapter. So essentially, it doesn't specifically say we have to do this through a subcommittee of the board, but gives us the foundation to do so, gives the board the foundation to do so. So this most recent MAC is comprised, well, in general, by policy, the MAC is comprised of 3 standing members and up to 6 ad hoc members. By policy, the member of the BPC, the public board with medical expertise is the chair. So that's in policy. The current members are Jack Waterman, Dr. Jack Waterman. He's a retired family medicine practitioner and the Board of Pesticides Control member. He is the chair and is a standing member. Dr. Mark Nevin, who is an MD. He's the medical director for Northern New England Poison Control, but he's also an emergency medicine physician for Maine Medical. And he's a standing member. Dr. LaBelle Hicks, PhD, retired Board of Pesticides Control toxicologist. She's also a standing member. And then Emily Pullen was our sole ad hoc member for this particular medical advisory committee. She's a registered nurse, and she's also the school nurse consultant for the Maine Department of Education. So with regard to the purpose of the MAC serves as a source of expert advice for the public member board. Its members are experts knowledgeable in the field of human health research or clinical practice, who can add their assessments to the economic and benefit recommendations of other experts before the board initiates a ruling on pesticide restrictions. So just as it says in statute, essentially this is the embodiment of that statutory language. The MAC is charged with a specific pesticide use question and provides consensus recommendations to the board. And as it does for the public member board staff, complete the work of the MAC by compiling minutes, preparing agendas, writing reports, and so forth as is requested. So with this most recent MAC, to date, they've met 3 times. They met September 20th, November 18th, and December 15th. It took a little bit of time to get the original group together. There was a need to revise policy, and that's reflected in the report related to the MAC, solely because one of the standing members is actually the state toxicologist. And it was determined that he and his staff were unavailable due to need to respond to both COVID and also PFAS demands. So there was a revision to the policy, and that's where Dr. LaBelle Hicks comes in as a toxicologist, a former board toxicologist. So there was a little bit of a hiccup there, but ultimately they were able to meet for the first time on September 20th. The meeting minutes for the September and the November meetings were both included with the report. And as mentioned, the December meeting minutes were provided, but were not included in the report as they were not finally adopted. So we wanted to make clear that, while those have been reviewed by all of the MAC members and edits have been suggested, they have not had an opportunity to meet again. So they have not been able to vote to adopt them. And I don't know if anybody has, or if you are going to hold questions until we're finished with our presentations.
I think we'll, kind of wait until you're done. That way we could be, interrupting and.
Sure, sounds good. Yep, just wanted to make sure I didn't need to leave any pauses for folks to have an opportunity to talk.
Nope.
Okay.
Good.
So to date, a number of activities have taken place. The major activities that have occurred, though, are that board staff were requested by the MAC members and then did collect and summarize 2020 and 2021 commercial applicator use records for applications of herbicides made on school grounds. So that was at the September meeting. We were asked to do that, and then staff did complete that work, and it came back with the results at the subsequent meeting. Staff have also completed a call-in and data summarization of Northern New England Poison Control or Poison Center data on pesticide exposures at Maine schools. So you'll see both sets of data reflected in a sort of summarized fashion within the report. We've also compiled all of the regulations pertaining to IPM and pesticide use on schools in Maine schools and also on school grounds at Maine schools. So you'll see that as a summary in an addendum to the report. And then we've also compiled what is essentially the starting point or an example of what risk assessment would entail. So that's at the very end of the report, just before the minutes, looking at possible exposure to 2,4-D at schools and using that as an illustration of future risk assessment work. So if we're going to talk about what the recommendations were that were made, voted on unanimously by the board members or by the MAC members, and this is an example of the kind of work that would be a part of that future work. So while the MAC members expressed a variety of opinions and overall consensus could not be achieved, 3 of the 4 members thought further study was warranted. All MAC members did vote unanimously to submit an interim report to the board and to include several recommendations in the interim report. So the report that you received, you'll notice that we've titled it interim report as opposed to a final report as requested by the statute, statute now. So what the recommendations were, so they suggested a review of existing rules and a recommendation to ensure that IPM by schools is understood to be mandatory. So schools are required under state law to use IPM, but that was a recommendation of the board to re-emphasize that to schools, of the MAC, to re-emphasize that to schools that IPM in fact is mandatory as a means of controlling pests within schools. To explore additional chemical specific details in a risk assessment. So again, that speaks to that example that I mentioned about 2,4-D, and Pam's actually going to talk a little bit more about that. And that's where she comes in as our toxicologist. She would be spearheading that effort. To request the board reevaluate IPM coordinator training for content and legality of using certain products on school grounds. So more or less in some of the data that we collected, and this is again in the report, there was an indication that some schools were choosing to use herbicides that were in fact not specifically labeled, or there was question about whether or not they were sufficiently specifically labeled for use on school grounds. And so that work has already been, or that issue has already been referred to enforcement within the BPC, but it is something that was noted as staff were reviewing the data. And then to recommend that staff conduct a survey of other states and their respective regulations of pesticide use on school grounds. So basically 4 major recommendations. And again, those are reflected in the report and were derived from a unanimous vote of the MAC members. So obviously, you don't see all of this work reflected in the report as it stands. So more time is needed to complete that proposed work. And we can talk a little bit more about that later on. We also had some staff recommendations and next steps that came out of the discussion. So we took the liberty as staff to include these because while they were not voted on by the MAC members, we thought that they would be meaningful additional efforts that could be added to additional research. So obviously we suggested that there be a referral of possible unlawful use of herbicides on school grounds to BPC enforcement staff. That we consider the effect of turf quality on the frequency of student athlete injuries. And so there's a literature summary included as an addendum to this report that was prepared by Dr. Hillary Peterson, who is the IPM specialist for the Department of Agriculture, that we conduct a review of IPM best management practices. So the state of Maine does have currently IPM best management practice for use of pesticides on school grounds or pest management on school grounds, and that maybe is worth revisiting to make sure that it reflects current best practices. And then to use the results of the MAC recommended risk assessment to identify lower risk pesticides. And that's where I finish. And I believe Pam, if you'd like to pick up from there to talk about data and risk assessments.
Before we go over to Pam, are there any questions for Megan? Yes, Representative Pluker.
Sorry, I'm slow on my buttons this morning. What pesticides were used inappropriately on the school grounds that aren't listed for the school grounds?
Yeah, so there are a number of them. They are on, let's see.
Are you referring to the MAC report?
Yeah, they're right in the MAC report. They're actually listed out as, I don't recall which page, but I can find it to you for you.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Yep.
I have the MAC report in front of me too. I just
Oh, okay.
mustn't have.
Find it together then, if you don't mind taking a moment.
Is it in the appendix or?
It is not. It's actually in the body, I believe.
Oh, okay.
Pam, feel free to chime in if you. Okay.
I have a slide with those.
Yeah,
Okay.
and it's page
Okay, well,
9.
then why don't we wait on that if she has a slide? Other questions?
Sounds good.
It also starts on page 9 if you're trying to figure that out. So there's a table too that talks about pesticides that were used and which ones were not.
I'll look at it and I'll wait on my questions till after we hear from
Okay.
Pam. She might just answer. Thank you.
Sure.
Yep. Any other questions before we leave Megan and I'll go over to Pam? All right. Good morning.
Good morning, everyone. I would like to share my screen. Is that all right?
Sure.
Okay, so we have been trying to provide just a very high level overview of some of the salient bits from the report. And I would like to get into the weeds on some of the details in the report. So nothing that you're going to see here is new, but I think it's really instrumental for how we think about exposures on school grounds. So Megan had mentioned that we have summarized some call data that went to the Poison Center. So we looked at 5 years of calls, how many calls came from schools. And there were 53 calls that went to schools having to do with any sort of pesticide exposure. And I was really interested in this data because these short-term acute exposures, they set the stage for letting us know how students are interacting with their environment and how likely we are to see these interactions and how these exposures. So that works out to 10 calls a year. 2 of the calls in the last 5 years had to do with herbicides. And I actually get to the stories of those coming up, so I'm not going to go into those details, but neither of those stories actually involved the exposure of a child to an herbicide. Very much as predicted, most of the calls to poison control had to do with cleaning products. This is kind of one of the last remaining stands where, because of the way that users don't feel that cleaning products are as risky, they tend to take riskier behavior. So that was not surprising to see that most calls had to do with cleaning and disinfection products. And by far, most of the calls did not result in any type of severity that most of the calls did not even warrant follow-up by the Poison Center folks. They were all mostly non-exposures or very minor self-limiting effects. I have a slide about that coming up. The other big data call-in that we did was the commercial applicator data. And this was really instrumental for us to see what is actually being used on the school grounds in a very fine way. Many applicators were not happy with this request because it was detailed and it asked for every application record that they had when they were on school grounds, what had they used for the last 2 years. And we found that most of the applications occurred in springtime, that there were gaps in the data reporting. And so part of this is my novice approach to the data call-in. I think going forward, I would have a much better grip on exactly how to get the exact data we wanted out of the applicators. So when we go back and try to draw really strong patterns from this data set, it's difficult because sometimes we're missing a site or a date or so it's a useful set of data, and it has given us some insight into what's going on. We did see that there were 22 different products that were being used on school grounds, and I'm going to show you which ones those are. And it was really disappointing to see that 6 products were being used that were not supposed to be used on school grounds. So this is the table that comes out of page 9 from what Megan just said. These are all of the active ingredients recorded during this data call-in. The column to the right are the ones that were not allowed to be used on school grounds. And there are the EPA registration numbers as applicable for those particular products. And as Megan mentioned, this went to our registrar where it was checked and verified that the label didn't support school uses, and has then gone to enforcement for follow-up with the inspectors. I mentioned spring was the most common time for applications. This is important in terms of thinking about when children are there, when can applications be made in the safest manner possible. It looks like the applicator community favors spring for weeds. This makes a lot of sense. So now it's going to take some more thought about the timing there.
Can I interrupt you just for a second?
Yep.
The House Chair O'Neill had her hand up. Was that a mistake, Representative O'Neill, or?
Thank you,
Jeff,
Mr.
question?
Chair. I just wanted to go back to that slide a little longer, or maybe during questions we can go into it in more detail.
This one?
Yeah.
I think
the
one
lit,
before that.
they just had a lot of stuff. Would you be able to talk in more detail about it? About the substances?
Yeah, so one of the things that's vexing for most people when they're talking about pesticides is when you go to the store, you buy a product, yet when you're talking to me, you're only talking about active ingredients. And so when I'm interested in tallying what has been used on school grounds, I take that product and I break it apart into each of the active ingredients that was used. So we know that there were over 400 pesticide products uses used, and this is a difficult concept to explain. But if an applicator shows up at a school on one day, they can use one product. That one product can have multiple active ingredients, or they can use multiple products in it. So this is a breakdown of just the active ingredients. It explains to us the universe of what applicators are choosing to use currently. And as Megan mentioned, the IPM coordinators for schools are responsible also for this process of making sure that as part of an IPM program, that the pesticide with the least risk is being chosen. So this just represents 2 years of data sent to us by applicators, what they actually did use on school grounds. I don't know the names of, like, I can't tell you what the names are or what the specific sites are. These are the chemicals of interest for us.
Does that answer your question, Representative O'Neill?
Thank you.
Representative Underwood, I see you have your hand up. You're muted, sir.
Yes, you're kind of in a shadow, or you're looking at you. When I see you on my screen, you look quite dark versus light. You could use a little bit more light so we can see your face a little bit better.
I agree.
And that's all I wanted to mention to you, that you make sure you knew about it. Thank you.
I apologize for that. I'll figure it out by Thursday, how to do this better. I did want to go through the types of calls we received, that Northern New England Poison Center received over the last 5 years, specifically with the stories behind the 2 herbicide calls that they received. In one of the calls, a child went to the school nurse because they had eaten a large number of dandelion heads and had a stomach ache. This is an important story. This is a middle school child eating the food. So you cannot just think of the pesticide exposure as a skin-to-skin contact. You do have to be prepared for occasionally interesting choices. And then the second call, a sports team entered a field. Somebody saw that there was a pesticide notice sign. The team was called off because the sign indicated that there had been an application and that they were not allowed on the field. And calls were made, and it was confirmed that the field had not been treated. That was a pre-notification posting, and there had been no actual exposure. So those are the 2 times where in the last 5 years we are aware of these type of exposures happening to students. And so that kind of moves me away from the report and moving into explaining what the risk assessment that has been called for is about and why it is important for that MAC committee. So this is a very brief introduction to risk assessment. So in my role, I am a risk assessor. I am not a risk manager. The risk managers are the folks that are making decisions about how much risk is appropriate. My role in this is finding out how much exposure is there, how much hazard is there for these uses. And the process of a risk assessment allows risk managers to make their judgments based on data, which is really instrumental to avoid being arbitrary. And it also allows flexibility as new information comes available. You have the data to predicate decisions from. Every chemical is a poison. This is a trite, tired phrase that you will hear from every toxicologist I know, but the reason is because it's really fundamental to how, on a practical sense, we have to manage chemicals. There's a database I go to when I'm looking for effects. It's the PubChem database. I typed in water, and here are occasions where we have harmed people and tested animals on the effects of water. So we know there's a concentration. That very top one is an infant, the lowest tolerable dose of water you can administer to an infant before you start having effects of too much water. So I don't think I have to explain, water is really fundamental to life, but there is still a concentration. When you pass it, you go into a dangerous health area. Another chemical I use to describe this dose response assessment, this is the key step in the risk assessment process, is formaldehyde. Formaldehyde is the gas that made FEMA trailers so toxic. My cheap desk right here, off gases formaldehyde over time, so it's an airborne pollutant. It's a preservative for many things. We know that formaldehyde causes cancer, and it's a liver toxicant at high doses. But we also know there is a small dose of formaldehyde that does not cause problems. And this is kind of driven home by the fact that your body produces formaldehyde. Every cell in your body goes through a biochemical pathway, whereas for one little moment, a formaldehyde molecule is created and then it's changed. So that we know that as you have small doses in different locations, they're not always, it's not going to produce an effect. Another example of how we think about pesticides and how we manage risk. Pictured here are two products. On the left is a currently used pesticide product. It's for termites and ants. And when you look at its packaging, it says, do not allow children to enter this area until it's dried. Prevent exposure to skin. Do not allow it to reach people or animals. And that is because in this scenario, it is not worth the risk to the individual to be exposed to the chemical. However, that same exact active ingredient is involved in this medicine that you see on the right. It's a cream. I have a blow up of the instructions for its use. Apply a thin layer uniformly and massage into all skin surfaces, the trunk, extremities, including the soles of the feet. So it's the same exact active ingredient at the same exact concentration. The benefit and risk profile balance is different for these things because they have different uses. So in the risk assessment process, the goal is to identify that concentration that you can be exposed to that does not produce negative effects. And it's created by a series of information collected during the pesticide registration process. And I'm not here to defend any particular pesticide, but to show you guys what the process has been, where after 50 years of chemical regulation, why is it that these chemicals are still allowed for use? And it's predicated on a lot of data collection. We have information on health studies and how the chemical moves through the environment. One thing you always hear is the risk equals exposure times hazard. This is where we get our dose response curve for the risk assessment process. So if you look at the green line, this would be an example of one. As you go up the x-axis, you've got increasing mortality. As you go across from left to right, you've got an increasing dose. So health effect studies, and there's a variety of different types of studies. Scientists would start with one dose and increase the dose over time. And as you increase that dose, you're looking for when do you start seeing effects? It's all of the chemicals we're allowed to use in pesticides are meant to be used for 70 years. That's the lifetime of the individual at the recommended dose without any undue harm. So you're supposed to be able to use these things with no effect. The concentration where you go from no effect to pow, suddenly we start seeing effects. Those effects have to be avoided. And so the process of a risk assessment is finding that one concentration. And I believe that Dr. Hicks will probably be mentioning this particular marker in toxicology. It's called the NOAL, or the No Observed Adverse Effect Level. And it's the concentration at which you do not, that's the highest concentration, there will be no effects. And there will be about 20 different studies that are done looking at trying to find that highest concentration with no effects. Part of the risk assessment is that you have to recognize every chemical is different. it's just kind of objectively incorrect to say that all pesticides will stay on the ground forever. We know that all of them are very different. So this is also in the report. These is a half-life graph showing you the persistence of those chemicals that we found reported to us by applicators. And you can see some of them will be eliminated to zero in a very short period of time, less than a week, while others are going to be months and months and months and months before they get there. So every chemical needs to be evaluated for how it moves through the environment, its potential to get into air, its potential to get into water or into tissue. That will differ by each chemical. The persistence, like this graph shows, and then each chemical has a different hazard. The example I like to use a lot about hazard is sharks. They have high intrinsic hazard. As a swimmer, if I jump into the ocean with a bunch of chum around me, I have greatly increased my risk. But that risk isn't absolute. Baby sharks don't present the same risk as adult sharks. Putting my toe in the water is not the same as jumping in the water. So it's a gradient, and it's about finding that comfort point where the risk is worth, the benefits are worth the risk. So moving forward, what would happen would be, we would go back to our database and scan it for all of the possible legally allowed active ingredients for school grounds in Maine. Right now, this is the list that we believe of chemicals that would be allowed on school grounds, and then do a risk assessment on this list. And this lets the risk managers, whether it's the IPM coordinator or any other regulatory group, the tool to start these comparisons. In an IPM framework, there's different needs based on different situations. And so having a suite of chemicals, knowing their relative toxicity and risk, is the tool that the risk assessment would produce for folks. That is the end of my slide deck. And we can take any questions that you might have.
Are there any questions for either Megan or Pam? Representative Pluker, I know you had a couple questions, at least relating to the chemicals earlier that were misused.
Yeah. Do we, I guess the first question, do we have a sense, was it like a policy decision to exclude these from use on school grounds? I assume that was made at the EPA level, or is this just, or you think that's just something that's happened by accident?
Yeah, it's just the label language. So they're just, the products are not labeled for use on school grounds, and they were chosen by whomever, I guess approved by the IPM coordinator, but selected by a commercial applicator for use on school grounds. So it comes down to labeling. And so it is technically a violation of federal law as well as state law.
But it's not that the EPA studied these chemicals and decided they're not good for school ground use. Not necessarily.
There could be other, I think only one, maybe two of these active ingredients are not, there are no products with this active ingredient labeled for use on school grounds. Others, maybe one just had very generic label language. So for example, the product that had eugenol and clove oil in it, the language was very, very, very general in a way that didn't appear to allow use on school grounds. So it's a variety of different factors.
So it's the brand, it's the actual packaged thing that wasn't allowed. It's not that these actual chemicals aren't allowed on school grounds. They are allowed on school grounds.
Could be
in other.
Could be
potentially,
yes. Yeah, if a company chose to register a product, right, they'd have to go through the same process as all the ones that would have the label language that would permit it. But yes. Yeah.
Makes sense. What would be the timeline, I guess, for doing a risk assessment of the sort that was called for in the report?
Yeah, so Pam, I don't know if you want to.
So that is a good question. One that we have been mulling. And I can't give you a straight answer, but I'm going to give you my thoughts on a straight answer. If you said, I want to know more about chemical X, you've got one day. In the end of 8 hours, I could tell you a bunch of things about chemical X. I could also spend 2 years. You could have an entire thesis on one chemical. So we have a list of about 23 chemicals. And the scope of what you get back is directly linked to the amount of time and money you're allowed to put into it. I mean, I would love to have answers now, but I know that it takes a lot of time. It's, like we would have done that for the purpose of this interim report if it was possible to have done that for the interim report. It just is a lot more time than that. And I don't know if other people like Megan, I don't know if you have any better answer than that.
Yeah, I think, part of it depends on other constraints on Pam's time. And I know that we have some other report outs that are going to follow this. And I don't know what those will be asking of her and us. So that's a little bit of the challenge, right? Pam is our toxicologist. She is the one person to show that addresses that. If we had support for Pam, then maybe there would be some ability to shorten a timeline. So that's a consideration as well, right? So whether it's contracting out to additional toxicologists or contracting out components of literature review, that can also help take the pressure off and maybe speed up a timeline. So, there are a number of things that come into play, but we've also talked about the scale of review and, whether or not there's a desire to have essentially original literature reviewed, right? So if you want us to actually go back to the literature, or if it would be reasonable to look at, and you'll see this reflected in the report, Pam's done a really nice job of compiling a lot of information from, for example, the EU and California's Prop 65, and comparing how the active ingredients that we've identified as used on school grounds would compare to various regulations, or whether or not member states in the EU have allowed use of these things, of these active ingredients. So that kind of information could also be, that is existing, could be pulled into a risk assessment if it were desirable to do something a little more like a meta-analysis as opposed to original literature searching.
I'll like condense my question then.
Yeah.
The question, like, if you were to give a report back next year to this committee, which of those 23 pesticide ingredients are the least likely to harm a child, or the ones that we would best recommend for use on school grounds, would you be able to do that?
Yeah, I think with support, I think that's something that we could accomplish. Yeah, so with some additional, with contracting out, for example, LaBelle Hicks, who's on this call, she obviously has quite a lot of expertise in pesticide risk and pesticide toxicology as well, having served in Pam's role for decades. So that would be a real consideration of potentially, working as a larger group of folks to speed up that process. I think that's something.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
Representative Underwood.
Yes, good morning. My question revolves around jurisdiction. What is the department responsible for? Are they responsible for, what exactly are they responsible for? And how is it communicated, any decisions, with the local school board? Thank you.
Yeah, so there's a chapter of rule that's somewhat summarized in this report that pertains specifically to schools, basically K through 12 schools, and then also pre-K schools that are affiliated with a K through 12 school. And so it's sort of like, if it's folded into the building complex that is the K through 12 school. But we also have, it would extend to public school or private schools as well. But it's basically a requirement for IPM to be used on school grounds. We also would regulate all pesticide applications. Essentially, we regulate all pesticide applications occurring across the entire state. So whether you're a private individual using a pesticide or you're a school choosing to use a pesticide, we have authority in that arena. But when it comes to the school, so essentially the school cannot make its own pesticide applications. They have to contract out to commercial applicators or have a commercial applicator on staff, and we have authority over those folks and their licensure. So that's sort of where the two things meet. And in addition to that, the school IPM rule extends our authorities beyond just simple licensure to IPM coordinators. Every school or school district has to have an IPM coordinator appointed. And they have to make the board aware of that IPM coordinator. That person also has to attend trainings, both with the department staff initially and then ongoing. and they have to maintain records, and we can do school IPM inspections, looking at those records that they maintain, looking at whether or not they've maintained their certification as an IPM coordinator. There are a number of components there. So essentially, if they're choosing to use a pesticide, we have authority over it, is more or less the gist of it.
Yeah, follow-up question, Senator Dill.
Sure.
How is any decision that is made by the department, how is it communicated to the local school board? And for example, in my opinion, usually decisions of this magnitude should be made at the local level, with the approval of the local level, and with the local school board specifically. How is any decisions that you folks make at the department communicated to the individual SAD, School Administrative District, and specifically the board? How is the communication held?
Yeah, that's a good question. So we work with the IPM specialist. It is currently Dr. Hillary Peterson. She is actually just down the hall from me, but she is the primary contact for schools on all issues related to IPM and practice of IPM on school grounds. And so she operates a number of mailing lists and other methods of communicating with IPM coordinators. But you raise a good point in that we primarily communicate through IPM, the IPM coordinator that the school appoints. And so that could be anyone from the superintendent to maybe the facilities manager, but it's an array of folks and different with every school depending on how they've decided to appoint responsibility for IPM management on school grounds.
Thank you very much, Director Patterson.
You're welcome.
Representative O'Neill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question is about, first I wanted to express my concern about what we're receiving, just because of what the resolve says. It says that within existing resources, that a medical advisory committee should be established to evaluate the potential impacts of herbicides used on school grounds on human health. And I'm glad to see that in your recommendations, you're talking about a risk assessment, but really what the path of this bill was to keep kids safe and ban the use on school grounds. We compromised and banned 2 substances and then asked for a review for impacts on health so that we could make further decisions to keep kids safe. And this timeline should be urgent because we're talking about kids developing bodies, and that's very serious. And I'm really concerned about advancing this and making this a priority. So that's what I'll say is I'm not asking you what timeline works for you. I'm expressing that we need to hurry this up and spend our time on keeping kids safe. And my question for you is, my first question is about the poison control data. I saw in the minutes that folks said this is such an inadequate way to measure the health risks of pesticides. Why are we focusing so much on this data? I heard that it can give some idea of what kids are doing and what's out there, but is this at all an adequate way to measure health risks to children and developing bodies?
Yeah, so Pam, I don't know if you want to handle that or if you'd like me to tackle it first.
I've got one thing and you can follow up.
Okay.
Nobody thinks that acute data tells you about chronic risks. That is not the intent of that data. I don't see it as a focus of the report. It is interesting data because we know chemicals that are going to cause many acute effects are the chemicals we need to worry about for chronic effects. And the lack of exposure for acute effects helps us understand exposure for chronic effects. Absolutely, you're right. You cannot tell cancer effects at age 70 from an acute effect at age 6. That wasn't the intent. But on a very practical level, when I look at outside of the scope of this bill, where kids are actually being affected, we still injure a great number of kids because of drinking pesticides that they find under the cabinet at home, drinking disinfectants. The only death to a pesticide that we have seen in modern history for New England isn't an agricultural herbicide. It was a poor guy cleaning the back of a buffalo wild wings. So there is real risk from some pesticides. That's part of what the data shows us. But absolutely, it's really just to make sure that we were getting that part right, making sure schools are not allowing access to children with whatever chemicals they have right now. So I was pleased to see that there are no incidences of children at janitors' closets with access to these chemicals. That is part of the value.
Thank you. A follow-up question, please, Mr. Chair.
Sure.
I'm curious if you can go into more detail about the products that were used that weren't labeled for use on school grounds. Can you talk in detail about each of those 8, just to give us an idea, and what your follow-up steps have been?
I don't have that information. It is once they got sent off to enforcement, I kind of dropped them, and I don't remember, we collected that a long time ago. I absolutely could send you by like little blurbs about each of the products, but I don't have that here today.
Okay, I'm very concerned about that. I would like an update about the products, what was used, the situation, just so that we can know also what you've done to mitigate that going forward. And I think that would be good for the committee to get an update. I'm looking also at if you could go over the main recommendations one more time, what your recommendations are, what you've executed so far, and what, just kind of give us a timeline of what's to come on those recommendations.
Sure. Yeah. So these are the max recommendations, just to be clear, as opposed to staff's. And excuse me. So they recommended essentially 1, to submit the interim report. And these were all unanimous votes across all 4 members of the MAC committee. But to submit the interim report, to review existing rules and ensure use of IPM by schools is understood to be mandatory. That actually started out as a statement on to make it mandatory, but after further review of the regulation, it was apparent that in 2 places in chapter, it's very clear that IPM is in fact mandatory for schools when making decisions on pest management. So we're going to, go through that further and make sure that schools understand and IPM coordinators understand that IPM is in fact mandatory. And of course, that would pertain to more than just herbicides, but all pesticide use. To explore additional chemical specific details in a risk assessment, and Pam has gone into that in detail. To request that the board reevaluate IPM coordinator training for content and legality of using certain products on school grounds. So that would speak to your question about next steps with regard to unlawful use of pesticides or use of pesticides not registered for school grounds. Really, they're one and the same. To make sure that school IPM coordinators who have responsibility for making decisions about pesticide use on school grounds and have responsibility for signing off on those applications. So it's a school employee that signs off on these applications when they're going to propose to be made, that they are aware that they need to be making sure that those pesticides are actually lawful for school grounds. I think an extension of that, although not addressed here in the report, would be to communicate this same thing to commercial applicators who are making the applications. And then the 4th or 5th, depending on how you want to categorize it, recommendation is that staff conduct a survey of other states and their respective regulations of pesticide use on school grounds. So we know there are a variety of approaches that other states have taken, and just to get a sense of what those are. And we find that surveying other states can often be very helpful to understand what the what the legal mechanisms are, what the process of implementation has been, if there are any ramifications for whatever they've chosen to do, that can be a very useful way to kind of get a sense of, you know, what people have done before us, if anything, and what that has resulted in. So that's more or less the major recommendations from the MAC members.
Thank you.
Sure.
So in addition to my previous request, I'd like to request that we get the timeline on actions you're taking to implement this. For communication about mandatory IPM and about chemicals used and.
Are there other questions? We got about 3 more minutes before our hour is up and public hearings start. Representative O'Neill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There are 2 people that I wanted to hear from. One was the chair of the Medical Advisory Committee, Dr. Waterman, who made time to be here today. And also the sponsor is here as well. So I wanted to give each of them a bit of time to.
We're going to have a very short period of time. So would you please let in Dr. Waterman?
This work is very important. So I think we can take
and let in Dr. Hicks too, please.
Senator Dill, I can be very brief.
Sure, just a second. I saw another hand up. Representative Osher.
I'm very interested in hearing from the sponsor and from Dr. Waterman, and I understand that the work we need to do after this hearing is also important, but I would like to, I'd like to say that it's important to me that we can extend this so we can hear from both of them and ask some questions.
Representative Gramlich.
Thank you, Senator and Representative O'Neill, my esteemed colleagues. I am Lori Gramlich. I represent House District 13, which is Old Orchard Beach, and I appreciate the opportunity. I did have an opportunity to very quickly and in a cursory manner read the 72-page report. There was a lot of material in there. While there were some good recommendations about the actions that schools should take to ensure compliance with pesticides, I don't feel that the report made an explicit statement about the use of herbicides other than glyphosates and dicamba, which are already banned on school grounds. So I would respectfully suggest that the committee and the board look at further expansion of a ban that would go beyond glyphosates and dicamba. And I will defer my time to Dr. Waterman and others who are much more conversant in this, but I appreciate your indulgence.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Representative Gramlich? Okay, Dr. Waterman, do I see him here on the screen?
He needs to accept my invitation, and he's not.
I don't see him anyplace.
No, he's not there now. He was there, and he's not there now.
Okay.
I was inviting him, and he didn't accept the invitation, so maybe he's not there now.
I don't know if Dr. Waterman, if you're out there and you can hear us, would you link back in, please? While we're waiting, are there any questions, again, either for Pam or Megan or Representative Gramlich that anybody has while we're waiting?
I do have Ms. Hicks there.
Yeah, I see that Dr.
Okay.
Hicks is here.
Yep.
Yeah, are there any questions for her, either the toxicologist on the MAC? Don't know where he went.
I don't know.
Keep
I
looking.
tried.
Yeah,
I
don't
tried
see
3
him.
times to promote him, and it didn't work. And you have to click on his side. He has to click that. Oh, I see a telephone.
Maybe that's it.
Maybe I'm gonna let them through. Is that okay?
Yep, we'll see who it is. Is that you on the phone, Dr. Waterman?
Forgive me. My name is Thomas Arders. I was hoping to provide testimony to this hearing.
To what hearing? Which bill are you here for?
1942.
Okay, we're not ready for that one yet. We'll get back to you. Sorry.
My apologies.
Nope, no problem. That's our problem here. We got some technical difficulties. All right. I don't see him.
No.
So I guess we'll wait another minute or two and see if he comes back. And no one has any other questions for the other folks. I see Representative Pluka's got his hand up.
I wanted to ask, I guess, Director Patterson, to go through with your risk assessment. Do you need any action from us as a committee, or is that something you're planning on doing yourself and you have the funds to do it and that kind of thing?
Yeah, I think, if there's general support for that, that's great. It's something that we can do. That's kind of it. There will be, if we have to outsource work, then there will obviously be a cost associated with it, but it's something that we can continue to do. And I think we had energy to do it anyway. We just didn't have time to complete all of the work by the time this report was due.
And maybe we just write a letter to the department.
Dr. Waterman's back, by the way.
Oh yeah, I'd just say maybe we could just write a letter as a committee asking for a report back once that risk assessment is done.
Yep.
Thank you.
I think so. Thank you.
Cheryl, did you see that Dr. Waterman's back? Did he get in? Yes, there he is.
Yep. I was just sending him an email too.
Yeah, Dr. Waterman, can you hear me? Can you hear me, Dr. Waterman? You're muted, sir. Dr. Waterman, you there we go. Looks like you're unmuted.
Yeah, right. I'm perversely, my laptop cut out just as Representative O'Neill was starting to mention wanting to hear from me. So yes, how can I help?
Representative O'Neill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Dr. Waterman, thanks for making the time to be here. I was hoping that just like Director Patterson and Dr. Breyer had gone through, that you could go through a bit of the process that the MAC used to generate the report and the recommendations, and just give us some background on what you achieved consensus on, and some of your thoughts about the about children's health and safety and how we can prioritize this in the process.
Sure. Thank you for this opportunity. I'll try to condense. I know we don't have all day, but yeah, again, I'm a retired family physician from Waldoboro. I have been serving as the member of the medical community on the Board of Pesticides Control for approximately 3 years. We received the request from the legislature about this time last year to convene the Medical Advisory Committee and look at the potential impact of herbicides used on school grounds on human health. And as Ms. Patterson already indicated, we didn't really get meetings going until the summer, and we had 3 meetings to date. And from the beginning, there was some disagreement between myself and the other 3 members, in as much as I thought we, with a brief internet search, it would be very possible to answer the legislature's request. But the alternate view was that a lot more information would be more helpful. And certainly the end result of that information gathering, the interim report, which you have before you, is really a masterwork of finding data and for example, the number of school pesticide or herbicide applications during 2020 and 2021 was actually 458, which surprised me. I was also surprised to see that in my old high school, Madomic Valley, had been treated with glyphosate, apparently more than once, under the brand name of Mad Dog. So, in any event, my point of view on this is that there is a potential impact of herbicides on human health. As Dr. Breyer just summarized the risk assessment process, there's a debate between, or rather a conflict between the risks and the benefits of any individual agent. The risk assessment process, as was just described to you this morning, is not able to recognize the long-term risks that chemical exposures pose, especially to children. What I found was, for example, the Council on Environmental Health from the respected medical journal Pediatrics from 9 years ago said that epidemiologic evidence demonstrates associations between early life exposure to pesticides and pediatric cancers, decreased cognitive function and behavioral problems, chronic toxicity endpoints, meaning repeated exposures over time, identified in epidemiological studies, include adverse birth outcomes, including preterm birth, low birth weight, and congenital anomalies, pediatric cancers, neurobehavioral and cognitive deficits, and asthma. That in itself, from 10 years ago, coming from the major pediatrics establishment in this country, caught my attention. No one today yet has mentioned that there is data showing a 42% increased risk of non-Hodgkin's lymphoma with chronic glyphosate exposure. And that's from a journal called Mutation Research, published in July of 2019. The United States Environmental Protection Agency itself issued a report in 2014 indicating that there is no safe lower dosage limit for potential carcinogens in children. And they went on to give examples of how agents in the soil, inhaled in the air, or with skin contact, like on athletic fields, would play into this. And that's from our own EPA. The argument about why herbicides should be necessary on school grounds, within 75 feet of school grounds in Maine, seems to boil down to by eliminating dandelions and similar weeds, you would decrease the risk of athletic injuries to sports participants, like on playing fields. And there have been some articles in the sports medicine literature to that effect, that there is some measurable increase in risk. I would wonder how much of that actually takes place in Maine. And I would point out that for those who have chosen to have their kids participate in contact sports, such as football and many others, they're already accepting substantial risk of, severe chronic head injuries, spinal cord injuries, all that kind of thing. So we circle back to the Board of Pesticides Control motto is think first, spray last. And the integrated pest management, or IPM principles, are supposed to include balancing of risks and benefits. Well, the risks, including a 42% increase in the risk of non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, and all the other things I just mentioned, those risks balanced against the cosmetic benefits of eliminating weeds, perhaps some reduction in sports injuries. It just didn't wash for me. And I felt that we had plenty of information, which I have just summarized, to advise the legislature that for the time being, we should restrict all herbicides from application within 75 feet of school grounds. Well, that turned out to be just my point of view. The other three members of the MAC felt that it would serve us better to take more time to find out what we can about the risks of the currently approved herbicides, now that glyphosate and dicamba have been taken off the playing field. Certainly that information will be helpful when it comes, whether 6 months or 2 years, or your guess is as good as anyone's. I think for the time being, it makes perfect sense to restrict all herbicides known and coming down the road from application within 75 feet of school grounds. And if at such time down the road, some new herbicide is found to be safe and not have any potential, 70-year health effects, fine. But that'll be a future session of the legislature and a future version of the Board of Pesticides Control that would be making that determination. So I think I've talked too long already, but anyway, that's my point of view. And as Mrs. Patterson explained, I did vote along with the other three members of the MAC to forward the interim report to the full Board of Pesticides Control, and from them onward to your committee. After I participated in that unanimous vote, I reconsidered my position. I thought more deeply about the issues that I just spoke about. And so at the last Board of Pesticides Control meeting, when a vote was taken to see if the interim report would be forwarded to your committee, I voted no. I thought it was going to be too long to get any results, and I thought that the time for action is now. So that was the break in the unanimity. And I just want to stress again that the report itself is an excellent document, and it shows hours and hours and weeks and months of work by the Board of Pesticides Control staff. And so I take my hat off to them for that. But I think the time for the legislature to act is 2022.
Representative Osha.
Excuse me?
Representative Osha has a question for you.
Thank you so much for your testimony and for your work on this. I appreciate, but I don't quite get the nuance of you voting for the report and then not for the report. And I am with you that I think the time to act is now. My own nephew had cancer, which of course it's very hard to figure out where one gets cancer, but at 8 years old, and certainly the use of pesticides is one of the concerns on school grounds, was one of the concerns in how that could have occurred. So I want to know if in this discussion you were in, was there do you feel like there was an adequate discussion about the need for a precautionary approach to pesticide use? Was there a discussion about requiring organic management practices and excluding chemical management practices as the way that we should be proceeding as a state and how we manage pesticide use around our children?
I do not recall any such discussion.
So can you clarify again? You said it, but I'd like to hear again that you voted for releasing this report. You support that the report is extensive, but then there was where you wanted to, what was it that you said that you changed your vote on?
I realized that simply sending the interim report to your committee without any indication that there was a dissenting point of view would have the potential of misleading the committee and the full legislature about the sorts of concerns that I hold. And consequently, when the vote came to the full Board of Pesticides Control, I had to indicate my disapproval of sending the report as if that was the best way to go.
So the bill that called for this study had an exemption for agriculture and residential property use of herbicides near schools. Do you think we should revisit the bill and tighten up those exemptions?
At this time, I would give a definite maybe. I think it's clear as crystal to me that to protect children against potential hazards, we should definitely add all herbicides to that 75-foot. I feel that the larger issue of agricultural and silvicultural applications is just, it's beyond my my realm of knowledge, and so I couldn't really say that action should be taken on those other matters, but certainly they deserve further attention.
Are there other questions for Dr. Waterman? Representative O'Neill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Dr. Waterman, for being here. I did have one more question. Something else that our committee has talked about, other than the risk of pesticides, is also the risk of PFAS. And I'm wondering if you can speak a little bit about that too in the containers and possibly in the formulation.
Yeah. I share the concern of everyone who's looking at this matter, and from the medical point of view, the potential impact of these agents on many different bodily functions is very concerning. So and again, I'm no toxicologist. I'm nowhere near any expert in the matter, but from what I read in the papers, it's a matter of great urgency to get these substances removed from our environment as soon as possible.
Thank you, and thank you for your time today.
My pleasure.
Are there any other questions for Dr. Yes, Representative Underwood.
Hi, I just wanted to make mention of local control versus state control of these pesticides and what's good and what's not good for the kids of the district. The final authority should be the local school boards, not the State Department of Agriculture. They should act only in an advisory capacity to the local boards and give them the information they need to make a good decision, and let them, through their IPM, Integrated Pest Management specialist, communicate with the state what their decision is, and have the State Department accept it and implement it as approved or not approved by the local authorities, specifically the school board. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Any other questions for Dr. Waterman? I would just, before we go, I would ask Dr. Hicks if she would like to comment on the reported off from a toxicology standpoint. Anything you want to add to what's been said? If you can unmute, there we go.
I did. No, good. I'm going to say good afternoon now. The report is, I'm probably guilty of being the one who was pushing for the risk assessment perspective. And one of the reasons being that as Dr. Waterman just said, if we got a new chemical and there was no or very low risk, it would be a different issue than some of the high-risk products. We don't know the answer to those relative risk questions without doing the risk assessments. And that's the reason for doing them, so we can put things in perspective. So in order to answer that future question of, is this an acceptable new herbicide without any effects, we really need to look at how it ranks with the rest of the herbicides in the universe of things that are approved for use in and around schools. That's pretty much my 2 cents for the afternoon, I think.
Okay, so risk assessment. Okay, are there any questions for Dr. Hicks? Representative O'Neill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for being here and waiting to speak. Appreciate your time. I had a question about taking more of a precautionary approach, especially with children. And you had raised, not knowing, and I just was hoping you could comment on the logic of that. I'm just thinking, if I had a kid and I didn't know whether something was bad for them, I'm not going to feed it to them or expose them to it. So why would we not protect kids in the meantime?
Well, it's the thing is that EPA has been through the risk assessment process, and basically, yes, they're doing it on the national level rather than on the state and local level. But we would be relying heavily on the EPA's parameters to look in terms of risk to folks in Maine. And quite honestly, that is, as I said, ranking them and giving people choices is the reason for doing it that way. The other possibility is that, God forbid, all herbicides are banned for use on school grounds, and then somebody decides to use something without having any background at all about herbicides and uses something here again, such as the 6 products that were not labeled for school grounds to begin with. So basically, it's not only an issue of what's illegal to be used, but what would people be using if there was nothing legal to be used?
Other questions? All right. I certainly want to thank everybody for all their time today in presenting this. And it would appear that we will have more information coming to us at some point from the Board of Pesticide Control as they continue their assessment as directed through the bill. And with that, seeing no more questions, we will end the briefing and we will go right over to our public hearings. And I would like to open the public hearing on LD 626, an act to clarify temporary mooring privileges for moorings on inland waters. And is looking for Representative Stearns. Is he here?
He is.
Okay. Oh, yes, I see him right there. Good afternoon, Representative Stearns.
Good afternoon, Senator Dill.
Would you like to present your bill, please?
Certainly. Senator Dill, Representative Landry, distinguished members of the Joint Committee on Agriculture, Conservation, and Forestry. I'm Paul Stearns, and I represent House District 119 in Piscataquis County, and I'm pleased to present to you LD 626. This bill came about when a constituent inquired about regulations regarding a floating cabin that was located on a lake in the area. It was not a boat, and it was not real estate. And there was no clear person or agency to contact for any inquiries, complaints, conflict resolution, or rulings or enforcement. When the Joint Committee on Inland Fisheries and Wildlife and officials from IF&W began to look into the matter, it soon became apparent that various scenarios and sections of law come into play and that the matter required further study. IF&W Deputy Commissioner Tim Peabody and John Knoll of the Submerged Lands Program and several other staff members have done great work in identifying and organizing the various bodies of law. And I believe that you either have that in your possession or you will soon have that, the results of their good work. I believe that it will take more time than what is available in the current legislative session, but I'm in hopes that this committee will see the importance of providing citizens, governmental bodies, and enforcement agencies with clear direction and guidelines on these matters. It will take careful deliberation to make certain that all people may continue to use and enjoy our inland bodies of water while respecting the investment on the part of property owners to do the same. And I'll gladly take any questions that committee members may have.
Are there any questions for Representative Stearns? Seeing none, thank you for your presentation.
You're welcome.
Now, just it's kind of a follow-up, and I think he mentioned it. This was over in the IF&W committee, and it ended up being transferred over to ACF because of submerged lands. So because of that, we have Deputy Commissioner Peabody here to, on behalf of the IF&W, to kind of give you an overview of what's happened with that, and then I will go to John Knoll to talk about the ACF standpoint. So, Deputy Commissioner Peabody, welcome. You're out of place, but it's okay.
Thank you, Senator. Good afternoon, Senator Dill, Representative O'Neill, and joint standing members of the Agriculture, Conservation, and Forestry. I'm Tim Peabody, Deputy Commissioner at Inland Fisheries and Wildlife. As Representative Stearns indicated, it came to our committee, and we quickly, in preparation for testimony, determined that it wasn't a mooring issue as the title describes, but is more of a floating structure issue. So we found the best way was to actually do some research, and we were directed by a letter from our committee to organize the bodies of law and enforcement, appropriate enforcement, and really look at the issue and report it back. So I'm going to, I believe this committee has the report. I think it was sent out last night. I'm going to work my way, just paraphrase my way down through it rather than reading the whole thing. Take questions. I see Rebecca Graham from Maine Municipals on here, as well as John Knoll from Agriculture, Conservation, Forestry to answer any detailed questions. So I'll begin looking at following up with Representative Stearns on some of the questions that have arisen out there. You know, are these floating camps legal? Are they motorboats? Are they some type of a watercraft? Or are they a dock? What are they? Who should regulate them? These were all the questions that were coming on the table. They've been coming into John Knoll and Submerged Lands for years, but they really started to get some attention, certainly to Representative Stearns. So I'm going to first outline some of the authorities. I'll start off with the Department of Inland Fisheries and Wildlife. The nexus to this issue is in Part 13 of Title 12, specifically chapters 933 and 935 regulating watercraft. So, you know, to put it in perspective, watercraft under Part 13 is the motorboats and paddle craft that we all enjoy using on our main waters. That's the principal body of law under Part 13 is the operation of a boat. We register them, we direct how they're with the safety equipment on them and how they function on our main waters. We also have rulemaking under Title 12, Part 13 jointly. We have very specific rulemaking authority, and Commissioner of IF&W in concert with the Commissioner of DMR have specific issues that we can rule make on as a department. For enforcement, the Maine Warden Service is a primary enforcement bureau for these, again, watercraft laws under Part 13. And the part that some people aren't aware of is Part 13 outlines other law enforcement officers that have enforcement authority also for watercraft laws. And that's any municipal police officer, has authority for enforcing watercraft laws. Constables, sheriffs, state police officers, as well as inland harbor masters all have enforcement authority for watercraft laws as specified in Title 12, Part 13. The issue there is most organizations, law enforcement organizations, have other primary focuses that they work on. They then primarily rely on the warden service to be the primary enforcement officer, even though others have that responsibility. Moving on to Department of Marine Resources, their authority, they have, as I mentioned, joint authority for rulemaking with the Fish and Wildlife Department, and their Marine Patrol officers have statewide enforcement authority over all watercraft laws. These are all these bodies of law are actually laid out fully in the report with links that you can specifically go on and look at them yourself. So moving on to agriculture, conservation, and forestry, specifically under the Bureau of Parks and Lands, they have their authorities outlined in Title 12, Part 2. Related to the topics of concern in LD 626 can be found in the submerged and intertidal lands portion, the public trust for intertidal lands, public boating facilities, and also swimming areas on inland waters. These all fall under Part 2 of Title 12. And again, John Knoll, who's on here, can answer specific questions about that. For enforcement, they have a limited enforcement authority from the Bureau of Parks and Lands over matters within the jurisdiction of the Bureau. But as I think that they can explain, they don't have a large staff. Well, large, I can't say the warden service is large, but they don't have staff enough to cover it on a statewide basis, and they can explain more. From a municipal level, municipalities are very limited on their ability to regulate watercraft. Under Title 12, Part 13, municipalities may not enact any ordinance, law, or rule regulating the operation, registering, numbering of watercraft, or any subject matter relating to watercraft related under Title 12, Part 13. However, there is a provision that, of course, if they have municipal law enforcement, they can enforce watercraft laws. They just cannot enact laws related to the operation, registering of watercraft. There is a provision, again, this is for municipalities. It's under Title 12, Part 13. It's for municipalities to have a inland harbor master. And having an inland harbor master, if they can have a harbor ordinance, and then they can regulate the placement of moorings under Title 38, subsection 3. So again, you have municipalities with law enforcement officers that can enforce watercraft law, but they cannot enact law, but they can enact an ordinance on placement of moorings if they have an inland harbor master. And if you haven't figured out yet, I'm designing chaos here in this report, because that's exactly what it is when it comes to the particular issue that Representative Stearns has brought to us. So I'm going to just do a quick analysis of the issue. As Representative Stearns indicated, we're talking about floating camps and homes, or floating structures. And you'll see in the report that some are motorized and some are unmotorized. And I've actually learned in our department that we've actually registered some of these things as watercraft, as boats. They have registration numbers on them. They have outboard motors on them, and we registered them as an actual boat because they actually met the definition of a motorboat under Title 12, Part 13. These things have been moored permanently. They've been anchored within the water safety zone, outside the water safety zone. And the questions are starting to arise on more of a statewide level now. And this is an excerpt from my report. Questions have arisen at the state and municipal level as to whether such structures are legal. Are they motorboats and require registration? They simply follow current mooring and anchoring regulations for floats or crafts. The answers to such questions are maybe, perhaps, and possibly. And that's the truth, because under certain circumstances, you could fit one of these floating structures into any one of those categories. There's questions about, are they actually houseboats? You know, what is a houseboat? Well, we don't define it in Maine law. Concerns that have been associated with this issue are certainly solid waste disposal, littering, spreading debris. I know John Knoll can describe some problems that he's had where these structures have self-destructed due to ice and winter conditions and landed on someone else's shoreline. So those are the ancillary concerns that come from this. The U.S. Supreme Court has ruled on this issue as a case out of Florida, where the U.S. Supreme Court said just because it floats on the water, it's not necessarily classified as a vessel that we would consider regulating under maritime law. And that, again, a quote, structures should be governed by local and state regulations, not federal maritime law. So this is all attached to this report, and I think you'll find it interesting as a perspective on this topic. The regulatory complexity, which is really what we were kind of charged to do, is look at the regulations that are associated with it. And, you know, we're not, all we're trying to do is show the regulatory complexity and the amount of state agencies and at the municipal level as to where all of this conversation intersects. And after this analysis that we have done collectively, we feel that if this topic is regulated, that it should be under Part 2 of Title 12 under Bureau of Parks and Lands. And we, as a Fish and Wildlife Department, I was first accused of trying to duck the issue. And I think when you look at the complexity and what's already in place under submerged lands and what the Part 13 watercraft regulations that we currently have, we think of motorboats and paddlecraft on the water. I think we can quickly see where the separation is there, and that if it's going to be regulated, that it better fits under Title 12 Part 2 under the Bureau of Parks and Lands. So again, we have the full report it has a lot of attachments to it. It has all the bodies of law for you to look at. And a number of articles. It's a national issue where we actually have some municipal ordinances attached to this report. We have the U.S. Supreme Court case law. And I think it's a good discussion for this committee to have and to us to have in respect to what Representative Stern put in front of us. So with that, I'll take questions from the committee that I can answer, or John Knoll or Rebecca Graham can speak.
Are there any questions for Deputy Commissioner Peabody? I just have one for you. In my own head, I have a difference of what anchoring and mooring is, but is there an official definition of what anchoring is versus mooring?
You can, that's probably partially a John Knoll question, but when you anchor a boat, there's regulations. I mean, you can anchor a boat outside the water safety zone, and you can anchor out there all night if you have a white light that's viewed from 360 degrees. This is all boating regulation. A mooring doesn't have that lighting requirement. You have to be moored inside the water safety zone, which is 200 feet from shore. And there are some challenges to the mooring regulations, as John can allude to. In fact, I asked them, what can you use for a mooring? Can you put a engine block down, a cement block, or what are some of these regulations regarding mooring? And what is the specific difference between mooring and anchoring? I just went from my personal experience and enforcement experience, but this is part of the issue that has to be answered here.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions? Representative Pluker.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Peabody, I don't know your correct title, but do you have a position on the bill? Do you support, or are you for it or against it, or?
I'm for it to be regulated under agricultural conservation.
Just shifted over there.
Great question.
But in terms of requiring the municipalities to designate somebody to be in charge of this, you're in favor of that as well?
I'm in favor, from our perspective as a department, to separate it from the definition of a watercraft, most importantly, because I just feel it's very confusing to the public. It's confusing to municipal officials to have that conflict in law. And I think that to do justice to the issue, we separate it from Title 12, Part 13 is a good move.
Great, thank you, appreciate it.
Representative Landry.
Thank you, Senator Dill. Good afternoon, Deputy Commissioner. I'm glad you're having fun here with us today. Going back to mooring, the definition of mooring. So if they have to be within 200 feet of shore, could I go out and drive pilings down to moor my boat? I don't know if that's for John or for you, but what is a mooring?
I'm going to turn that to John Knoll for submerged.
Thought you would.
All right, we'll wait for his presentation.
All right, yes,
Just a second, John. Just let's finish up with Tim and then we'll come over to you. Are there any other questions for Deputy Commissioner Peabody? All right, thank you for your testimony today. Good afternoon, John. Go ahead and give your presentation and start answering the questions that we fire at you.
Okay. Good afternoon, Senator Dill, Representative O'Neill, members of the Joint Standing ACF Committee. My name is John Knoll. I'm the Director of the Submerged Lands Program within ACF. I'm speaking today neither for nor against LD 626, but I do have some comments and recommendations in my testimony. LD 626 was originally introduced over a year ago by Representative Stearns to the Joint Standing Committee on Inland Fisheries and Wildlife. The bill was concerned primarily with floating camps and other non-water dependent structures, which are becoming increasingly common on Maine's great ponds and coastal waters. As background and context, the state of Maine holds title to submerged lands in great ponds and all coastal waters, from the mean low tide line extending seaward out to the 3-mile territorial limit. As such, the Submerged Lands Program manages all of these state-owned submerged lands through a leasing program that seeks to balance the public trust rights of fishing, fouling, and navigation with the demand for privately owned water-dependent structures such as piers and docks. Non-water dependent floating structures, including floating camps and floating homes, are not public trust rights. Floating structures, both motorized and unmotorized, have appeared on Maine's coastal and inland waters in increasing numbers over the years. They have been temporarily, in many cases, permanently moored or anchored in waters across the entire state. They've drawn the attention of other users of our waters, as well as shorefront landowners and municipal authorities. In some cases, as happened last year on Hadley Lake in East Machias, storms or winter ice damaged the structures, and the structures and their contents are abandoned for somebody else to clean up. Non-water dependent floating structures are often not fit for navigation and therefore must be moored or fixed at a dock permanently. These floating structures occupy limited mooring and dock space in Maine's great ponds, harbors, and working waterfronts. As a result, there is less space available for commercial fishing vessels and recreational boaters, both of which provide important revenue to Maine's waterfront communities. Float homes or other non-water dependent floating structures are neither defined nor addressed in Maine revised statutes. And as a result, these structures are not subject to local control unless a town has specifically addressed these structures in its municipal ordinance and has a harbor master to regulate the placement of moorings. This topic has received a lot of attention, continues to grow in Maine, but is not new on inland or coastal waters anywhere in the country. Most of these floating camp type structures are not capable of any level of maritime navigation, and per the 2013 Supreme Court decision, they are not therefore classified or regulated as a vessel or watercraft. As such, the Supreme Court ruling determined that these floating structures should be governed by local or state regulations, not federal maritime law. Questions have arisen at the state and local level as to whether such structures are legal. Are they motorboats and require registration? Do they follow current mooring or anchoring regulations, floats or rafts? The questions are unclear. Both DACF and IFW recognize the complexity of the issue. It is not just a floating structure issue, but also includes moorings and harbor management authority, watercraft or vessel definitions, and enforcement authority that spans multiple agencies. Many of these issues were raised in IFW's testimony to the IFW committee a year ago. But because LD 26 touches on several regulatory and statutory elements, both the ACF and IFW respectfully recommend a resolve directing ACF to lead an interagency group alongside IFW and with input from the Maine Municipal Association and the Maine Harbor Masters Association. If directed by the legislature, this working group will submit recommendations for statutory changes to the 131st second regular session in 2024. Given the complexity of this issue, we do feel the time frame suggested is necessary. I'll take any questions.
Thank you. Representative Schofield.
Thank you, Senator Dill, and good afternoon, Mr. Knoll. As a kid, I read the book Huckleberry Finn, and in that summer that I was 12 years old, I decided I was going to build a raft. And I built a raft out of some, I think it was pine or popple logs. I can't remember now. That was a number of years ago, 60 some odd. And I put a tent on it and I spent a good bit of time. My mom was very lenient. We were close to the lake and I spent most of my time on Webb Lake that summer on a raft with a tent on it. Came home for meals for the most part, but I guess I was a floating structure. I had a kerosene lamp that I used in the evening, but it wasn't lit all night. Anyway, I guess my thought is that I think there is a need to do something, but I'm not sure that we want to go and be too aggressive with this. And I'm wondering, whereas this seems to have been a problem for some time, as you acknowledge, have you looked at what other states may have prescribed for a solution, if any, and what that might be if you have? Thank you.
Yes, actually, over the last few years, I have looked at different states. West Coast, places like Sausalito and Seattle, as you know, have large floating home communities. They are heavily regulated today, these structures are highly regulated, not only where they can be placed, but also how they're constructed. They have to be hooked up to municipal water and sewer. They have to have insurance. The TVA, Tennessee Valley Authority, looked to regulate these as well, and they had quite a good definition of what separates an actual boat, a vessel, from a floating home or floating structure. Other states like New Jersey outright banned by statute these floating homes. In New Jersey, the last floating home community that was grandfathered in was destroyed by Hurricane Sandy, and those homes broke loose and they floated out into the river. They floated out into the bay and sank. And these people, they didn't have traditional mortgages. They didn't have insurance. You know, the homes were basically cleaned up by the state. Here in Maine, I mentioned East Machias. This was a 30 by 40 foot platform with a structure that was roughly 20 by 25 feet on blue barrels that froze into the ice. It was year round. That just broke free and went ashore and broke apart. I don't know if Tim's crew had gone out there and cleaned it up. It was IFW, I think, that found it. So while, you know, camping out as a youngster on a tent and a float is not what this is intended as. This is intended to try and address an issue that impacts the public trust rights of other folks. You know, on the coastal waters, just about every harbor in the state of Maine has a wait list for either a mooring or slip space. Most of the floating structures that I'm aware of are not in, say, a mooring or a harbor properly, because most of these coastal towns have an ordinance that addresses it. But the problem would still be the same, and that is there's a limited amount of space for actual public trust rights of fishing, fouling, and navigation. And a floating camp or a floating home is not a public trust right, and it displaces other public trust right users.
Thank you. When they break up and become a hazard to navigation, that's the responsibility of the Bureau of Parks and Lands. So there's another reason to get on board with this, because it's not the Warden Service, it's the Park Service that's responsible for hazards to navigations on navigable waters. Thank you.
Representative Pluker.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I don't know if this is best a question best asked of you, Mr. Knoll, or back to Mr. Peabody, but how do we currently regulate houseboats, what you would call a houseboat? Is that just like a normal boat, or are there separate regulations for that?
So from submerged lands standpoint, our rule simply says non-water dependent uses are not permitted over submerged lands. There's two problems with that. One is there's no enforcement authority, so we have to take someone to civil court to get them to, you know, to remove it. And as you can imagine, that's not terribly effective. The other thing is on coastal waters, submerged lands is from the low tide line out. But on great ponds, submerged lands is only the natural water line, the original pre-dam state the lake was in. So take Sebago Lake, for instance. If you remove the dam goes down, let's just say 10 feet. Well, 10 feet of depth horizontally could be 100 feet that the submerged lands program would have no say, even if we had enforcement authority. The public trust aspects of the water is still there when there's water that flows over that bathtub ring, if you will. But our jurisdiction does not follow it. Our jurisdiction is only the pre-dammed natural state of the Great Pond. So the long and the short answer is we don't really have any effective enforcement ability. And even if we did, there would be lots of loopholes.
Okay. So what a follow-up question, Mr. Chair?
Sure.
So what is something that's water dependent versus something that's not water dependent? Is that basically saying that you're a fisherman or have aquaculture operation?
So the submerged lands program, statute directs us to obtain fair market rent to use publicly owned submerged lands. And water dependent structures are an underwater or submarine cable that, you know, goes out to an island, because the cable can't be submarine without going underwater. A float and a pier is a water dependent structure. We consider dredging a water dependent, not a structure, but it's all within our leasing structure. So a home or a business can be done on land. Doesn't have to be on the water. That's the principal difference between the two. So when somebody comes to us with a proposal to build a pier, that's great. It goes over the intertidal, goes past the subtitle. Now you're over submerged lands. But now they want to have a restaurant that extends into the intertidal. Well, that's not submerged lands, so we don't have a say in that. But when it crosses over the submerged lands line, that is the low tide line, then we would say no, that's a non-water dependent use, and we're not going to permit it.
Thank you.
Yes.
Representative Landry.
Thank you, John. Having seen this come before 2 committees, can I ask a question? Is this something that should be given to the municipalities one by one to control with their harbor master?
I would have a few things to offer on that. So the last few summers, I live out in Orland, and there's a lake, Green Lake, crosses, I think, 4 municipal boundaries. And that was one of these floating camps that showed up and was getting some, airtime on TV and whatnot. The problem is if the city of Ellsworth expanded their harbor ordinance to cover their portion of Green Lake, they would first of all have to have someone that would go out there on the water to enforce it. But the person with that floating camp can just move it over the line to Dedham or Holden. And then, it's out of Ellsworth's problem, but the issue is still there. The other issue is one of capacity, and Rebecca could probably speak to that, is a lot of these municipalities just don't have the financial capacity, to hire a harbor master in the state of Maine. So, I think that's going to be a hard nut to crack because of the nature of these lakes being carved up by different municipalities. Unless everybody's on board, it's not going to solve the issue.
So we're probably stuck with it here in ACF. And as far as a mooring, a piling, if my neighbor decides he wants a floating, or somebody wants a floating home, can they come and drive pilings in front of my camp and moor their boat there?
Well, the pilings would require something from us typically, but that's also a DEP permit that would be needed. That is, putting a piling into a great pond or coastal waters. If they came to us on the floating home, I would say they're not permitted. But the reality is trying to enforce that is nearly impossible for us.
And one more quick one.
Sure.
What about taxation on these homes? Does anybody have an answer on that?
I do not.
No. Sounds like they're getting away with it. Thank you.
Any other questions for Mr. Knoll? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony this afternoon. And last on my list for this particular bill is Rebecca Graham. Welcome.
Thank you, Senator Dell and Representative O'Neill and distinguished members of Agriculture, Conservation, and Forestry. My name is Rebecca Graham, and I'm a legislative advocate with Maine Municipal Association and worked with Deputy Commissioner Peabody and Director Knoll throughout the summer to try to solve all the complexities that you just heard. There's competing oversight, there's competing boundaries, there's competing responsibility, and then there's lack of ability to enforce in some areas. And that's partially why I think probably the inland waters have been waters of the state by definition. The way in which we have developed this particular report, I think, outlines some of the tools that are necessary for municipalities to even think about being able to take something like this on, the complexity of just trying to define what is there. And if it's registered, there isn't necessarily any authority. There's a lot of confusion at the municipal level. If it floats, as you've heard, into a different community and that community doesn't have capacity, what then? There are a number of pieces that could be resolved if there were statutory or state level definitions for these. We certainly don't want to necessarily discriminate or discourage Tom Finn type adventures, but there are some obvious egregious ways in which those types of buildings have been used in some communities, and there's a real lack of clarity at the municipal level as to how to deal with that and how to address it, specifically because we had limited authority in a number of areas. If a municipality on an inland waterway even has a law enforcement agency or municipal police department, they don't necessarily have a boat, because that has not necessarily been their focus. It has been much more within that community and not necessarily in the water. That's not to say that they don't exist. Representative Stearns was kind enough to change the bill to forcing municipalities into trying to find someone to at least allow us to go through this process and look at the complexities. There's a number of municipal responsibilities that also fall in line in terms of the plumbing code and any shoreland zoning. And there's also issues with a lot of inland lakes with algae and water quality standards that municipalities are fighting quite a bit. So the lack of ability to enforce, the lack of clarity on how they can be enforced and removed has really kind of hit across a number of streams, as you've heard. So with that, we would really like this deeper dive so that we can really look at how we can sensibly either permit where necessary, restrict at all or in all areas where there are those concerns, but allow the municipality to have that ability, the clarity for them to draw up an ordinance, and then some clarity on the enforcement mechanisms. Taking enforcement at any level without that clarity is a risk for municipalities because it's a civil process. So there's going to be a cost for that. It's not necessarily an effective way of enforcement, but there can also be some public action campaigns and some conversations around this that occur as a result of this work. So we do support the recommendations that have come out of this report and had worked with the stakeholders extensively on them. And with that, I'm happy to answer any specific questions that you may have, but I think the complexities have all been hit really well previously.
Representative Schofield.
Thank you, Senator Dill. Thank you, Ms. Graham, for being here. You know, I can't help but think that if I had a fish house for ice fishing down here on Webb Lake, I have to have my name on it and my address, phone number, whatever, a way to contact me. If I have a cottage on Webb Lake, I can't do anything. I can't add a chimney to that without going to the planning board because I'm within the shoreland zoning. Well, it seems to me if you're in shoreland zoning beside the lake, you certainly are in shoreland. You're on the lake. I mean, that's even more problematical. It seems to me, I'm a simple guy, and it seems to me that if we could figure out a way to pass a law, and I'm going to ask you if your opinion on this, that these things have to be, you have to have your name on it, you have to have your address on it, which therefore puts you into some municipality. If I might live in Rumford, but I've got one on Webb Lake, somewhere someone ought to be able to charge me a registration fee or something for that. And I think if we can do it for other pieces of property, we just got to identify that who this belongs to and that it is a piece of property, and then define a way to value it. I don't think it's terribly complicated when you think of it in those terms. Your response, please.
Thank you for that, Representative Schofield. And obviously from the MMA's point of view, yes, we would love to be able to collect tax for our municipalities off those types of things, but we don't have that authority in this case. And the department and the state is the one that has the authority to decide what motor boats and vessels of that nature have for taxation. I think that you've also highlighted a bit of complexity that we ran into as well. And Commissioner Peabody, if he's still here, can probably speak to that. And that's who has enforcement ability when the water is frozen versus when their foot touches the ground. You're not necessarily trespassing when the water is frozen, but if you break through that ice and you touch the ground, you are. So they're the same thing with the public trust waters. The state has full enforcement authority over the water. And once there's a submerged piece, then it becomes a different entity. And the municipality has very limited authority depending upon where that low water mark is. And I think the other piece here that also hasn't been spoken of is the notion of the public trust rights. I know that Director Knoll had spoken of. There is also this idea that the view shed is somehow owned by that upland water person or landowner, and that's not the case. So I think that there is some response from this that has come from folks that might, the rest of the community might actually be amenable to that type of thing. If there was a boat, a houseboat, which is a federally recognized vessel that was parked in front, there would be no ability for a municipality to move that boat along. They could park there, but I think it would still probably be just as egregious. And I think that that's also why we wanted to sensitively think about this and think about this in terms of making sure that folks had access to those spaces. And sometimes I think that there are folks that are using them as rental properties, I think, at least in one area. I know that was the case. But you might be able to rent out your boat in the same way. So there's a lot of discussions to have about parity and whether or not we're being fair when there is any regulatory mechanism that is applied to this. But I think if there were standards, I think that is the way in which some states have gone, is that they've established really strong standards. When those standards are adhered to, then they're allowed, but then you at least know that they've met all of the plumbing and regulation and they've paid into that system. It's the just houseboat or homemade boat, slap a outboard motor issue on it that I think causes a lot of confusion.
Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony this afternoon. And I believe that's it. Is that correct, Cheryl? Do we have anybody else for 626? I don't think we do, so.
We do
with
not.
that, we do not, okay. Then I will close the hearing on LD 626, an act to clarify temporary mooring privileges for moorings on inland waters. And I will open up the hearing on LD 1942, an act to make changes to the state's hemp program. And I'm going to turn it over to Representative O'Neill. And I will introduce it and give a little background because my name has been put on the bill as a reporter or something. So with that, Representative O'Neill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Welcome.
Have at it, huh? Okay. So this bill, what the situation is with it, we have a hemp program. We've had a hemp program now for a few years. And ours, in the way we have been trying to treat the state program, is a little different than what the federal program is now. So we've been working on this bill now for, as I said, for several years, but this part of it is changes so that it allows the state to have its set of directives on how to implement hemp growing and what the parameters are that can be grown, what the restrictions are, what are the levels of CBD and other things in the particular product. And because of that, as I say, the committee has got together, we've listened to the department, and we have suggested a few changes, which actually allows people to have a state license. And if they have a state license, then they have certain restrictions and parameters they have to follow, or they can actually have a federal license, and that's a different set of guidelines over here. And so this is one of the things that we have been trying to work through over the past several months. Basically, that's all I would say about it in way of background. And I think we have Gary Fish from the Department of Conservation and Forestry, who's basically in charge of the hemp program for the department. So with that, are there any questions? Representative O'Neill.
I guess I'm raising my hand for myself. I was wondering if you could go over the 3 things that would be different in Maine. I
Yep.
can help with that too.
Yeah, nope. That the allowable concentration of THC from the Delta 9 concentration, which is not more than 0.3%, as defined in federal law, Maine would allow a 1% level. Current law also provides that the person may grow, harvest, process, sell, buy hemp if they hold a license by the state, and they can grow up to 3 hemp plants on no more than 1 acre of land or within an indoor facility, and they can have hemp for personal use without a license, meaning the CBDs. And this bill also provides that a person may also plant, grow, harvest, process, etc., or buy hemp if they hold a license issued by the United States government, USDA. So I think what it does, and I think Mr. Fish will probably give us some more information on it. This kind of impacts depending on which license you have, where your products can be sold, how they can be sold, etc. Is that what you were getting at, Representative O'Neill?
Thanks, that's helpful. Yeah, no, I just wanted to go over because it's just a different structure and so this is a committee bill that we put out and wanted to have a hearing and a public process about it. One thing that should be mentioned is, so you mentioned personal plants, you mentioned total THC 1%, because that was a consensus item that we heard from farmers and that they're advocating for at the federal level too. Another part of that dual license on the Maine side would be no background checks for farming, correct?
Right.
Okay. All right. Thanks for
So
your
no other
testimony.
questions? It's back to you.
All right, I would like to welcome up the department first, and then we'll go through testimony after that. Mr. Fish, welcome.
Okay, well, thank you. Senator Dill, Representative O'Neill, and honorable members of the Joint Standing Committee on Agriculture, Conservation, and Forestry. My name is Gary Fish. I'm the state horticulturist, and I'm speaking on behalf of the department in opposition to LD 1942, an act to make changes to the state's hemp program. And you should have 4 documents, the testimony, as well as the letter from the USDA Ag Marketing Service clarifying their role, as well as an article about how the uses of hemp or the hemp markets may be changing. And then finally, a description of the program expenses and what impacts may occur depending upon what happens if this bill is passed. So LD 1942 proposes redefining hemp as cannabis sativa containing no more than 1% total THC. So this definition exceeds the federal standard of 0.3% total THC, and it makes our existing hemp licensing program non-compliant with USDA's final hemp rule, and essentially creates 2 different licensing tracks for Maine hemp producers. We believe having 2 different tracks will create an unstable and untenable situation for Maine growers. First, there will be a hemp producers growing at the higher 1% THC level, and they will be licensed by our program. These growers will be prevented from selling raw hemp outside of Maine, since their crops will violate federal law. Then there would be the USDA licensed growers who would produce hemp at the lower federal standard. And USDA will also consider any growers licensed by the Maine program at the state's 1% total THC standard to be marijuana growers who could be subject to penalties. And that's why we added the attached USDA memo that they sent last night. So during 2021, we did do an extensive information gathering, surveys, and so on to get ideas from stakeholders about the type of program that would be best for Maine growers. And based on this extensive effort, almost all Maine hemp farmers stated they wanted access to USDA Farm Service Agency programs, bank financing, business insurance, among other things. They also wanted to be regulated by the state. And many also wanted access to processors and markets outside of Maine. However, these needs may be unattainable if this LD 1942 passes. Growers licensed by Maine's program with a higher THC standard will not have access to crop insurance, the cost share programs that are offered by the Natural Resources Conservation Service like EQIP and many others, and also different loans that are available through the Farm Service Agency. And they also won't have access to organic certification, financial lending, and business insurance. And further, neighboring states have already warned that the movement of Maine hemp into their states would be considered de facto illegal, since it will be difficult to determine.
Mr. Fish?
Yes.
I just wanted to let you know that we're at 3.5 minutes, and we did do a presentation on a lot of these items, so I'm going to give you a little bit to wrap up.
Okay, if hemp meets the federal THC standard when asked other state hemp programs about acceptance of Maine hemp under the proposed dual licensing premise, 7 states, South Carolina, Colorado, Connecticut, Louisiana, Alaska, and Kentucky said they would reject all Maine hemp if the grower license was directly licensed by USDA. Going it alone with a higher THC threshold adds instability to the regulatory landscape. Maine's fledgling hemp industry may suffer if we are the only state in the nation with a higher THC standard. The department is concerned that LD 1942 could isolate Maine hemp growers and greatly reduce the markets available to them. We know many of the 2019 licensed hemp growers still have unsold CBD hemp produced from that season. Further, hemp industry experts are forecasting that the future of hemp long-term is not CBD, but fiber and grain crops. And for these crops, the 0.3% THC limit is not an issue. And we attached an article about that. Another concern is that the new definition for hemp in 1942 would allow both raw
Mr.
hemp
Fish?
and hemp products to be sold.
Gary, we're at nearly 5 minutes. I think committee members can ask you questions, but we need to wrap up.
Sure. Well, I would just wrap up with saying that we think that this is going to, create a lot of problems in terms of understanding of who is licensing who and where they can sell their products. And also that this may create a problem for the long-term financial stability of the program. So I want you to look at the spreadsheet that was offered. And we don't think this is an prudent approach for Maine to enact this plan. And we think that, we should not pass LD 1942. We should go back to the USDA approved program. And thank you for your time. And I'm available for questions now or at the work session.
Thank you very much for your testimony. I see a hand up from Representative Landry.
Thank you, Representative O'Neill. Gary, so the whole gist of this bill is to get a higher content so they don't have to grow as much product and to ship, to process. Is that a fair understanding?
So what some of the growers would like to be able to do is grow at the higher THC standard, because then the plant will also produce more CBD, so they can get more CBD per plant. And that is one way to do it. The concern with this is that if the plants are that high, then they won't be able to sell that to other states, or this also allows them to sell products at the 1%, which is also a concern that we have, that those products would not be allowed outside of the state of Maine either.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for your question.
And just because I probably would have, just to explain, Representative Landry, I probably would have presented this had I been listed as the person, because I helped draft it, it makes 2 licensing schemes. So one is federally compliant if you want to sell out of state. And then what we're talking about when we say you couldn't do things and sell things out of state, that's exactly right. It would be a separate system for in-state. And I see a hand up from Senator Buck.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Couple questions, if I could. First, Gary, so if a state of Maine grower decided to go with the federal licensing, would he be able to do everything that other states that don't have the dual license? Would he be able to ship? Would he be able to have access to federal, the federal NRCM and equip and all those things? Or would, because the state had incorporated both, would it penalize the ones that wanted to stay just federal? Would it penalize them?
So that's a great question. If they were just going to license through USDA AMS, they could take advantage of all those programs as well as get financing and other insurance and things like that. But they would not also be able to participate in the 1% program. That's one thing that USDA made pretty clear in their letter to us, that if you want to do one, you can't do the other, because if you are growing something that's above 0.3% within the same business, then they're going to find that to be in violation of federal law.
Follow up, Madam Chair.
Absolutely.
My understanding is that just in the last couple days, the USDA under the Biden administration has come out with a $1 billion grant for hemp. And if they have, it's my understanding they have, it's coming out. Would having the dual registration in the state of Maine neglect our, limit our growers from receiving any of that federal grant money?
It would limit all of them that were licensed by the state. If they're licensed by the state, our state program will not be federally recognized, and those federal programs will not be available to those growers. That is made, again, pretty clear by the letter from USDA AMS.
Just to make myself perfectly clear, the ones that wanted to stay federal and be able to get the federal programs would be able to, even though they're in the state of Maine.
Yeah, they've said that what would happen is that we would have to provide them with all the names of the growers that we have now, and then they would pursue licensing directly through USDA, and those people that are licensed that way would be able to, utilize those programs. One thing that will be a problem is that many of the people that we license right now are also medical marijuana growers or recreational marijuana growers, and they will not be able to do that through the same business. They made that clear in the call that we had, as well as in the letter that they've provided, that if anybody's growing anything that's above the 0.3% THC on their farm, they're in violation of federal law, and they're going to report that to law enforcement.
I apologize, Madam Chair. Could I ask one more question?
Absolutely.
So in regards to extension and University of Maine, cooperative service and services other, would that affect them with the Maine, the ones that would be licensed in Maine, where there's federal money in those, like extension and those which have received federal money? Would they be unable to work with the Maine licensed ones?
So they would not be able to license with us because, again, they would be in violation of the federal law, and that would, they've always been concerned about that in the past. In fact, they held out on having an extension agent do anything with hemp for many more years than some of the other universities did, because their risk management folks told them that they couldn't handle hemp, and especially if it was going to, go above the 0.3% standard. One of the things that's lost with going this way is that with the USDA approved plan, there is the ability for the state to develop very specific guidance for certain situations, especially with research or with growing hemp greens or something like that, where the way that those products are sampled can be done in a different way, and the potential for a violation that ends up being a serious violation is taken away because the state has the ability to look at that differently.
Thank you.
All right. Next hand up is Representative Booker.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just to clarify, Mr. Fish, the only way forward where a medical or recreational cannabis grower could simultaneously grow hemp is if they were certified by the program that we're trying to create through this bill. Is that correct?
So if they're going to grow medical marijuana or recreational marijuana, the only way that they could be licensed would be through the state. They could not be licensed through USDA AMS and take advantage of all the grants and loans and other programs available.
But under current circumstances, they don't have access to that either.
Well, they would if we went on to having a state run USDA approved plan and ran our program according to that plan, then they would have access to all of that.
The USDA, I'm sorry, Madam Chair, one more follow-up.
Absolutely.
So you're saying that if the USDA approved the Maine State program, they would allow us to grow cannabis on our farms?
They would allow us to run our hemp program the way that we want to run our hemp program, as long as we are complying with their rules as well as the plan that we have. So they would not have their own inspectors coming to inspect hemp in Maine. We'd be doing that all ourselves. And as we've done all along, if a grower is growing medical marijuana and they're also growing hemp, we don't look at the medical marijuana. We just look at the hemp and we don't bring that forward. What they have told us is that if they had one of their inspectors go on to a farm that was growing both and they saw that they would report that to law enforcement.
Okay,
that's the difference.
I was confused. So the USDA will not require the state to enforce federal law when it comes to cannabis growing?
Basically, it's don't ask, don't tell.
I see. Okay, thank you.
All right, do I see any other questions? All right, seeing none. Thank you for your testimony, and I'm looking at my list to see who is next.
I have a Heather Spalding, if you'd like me to bring her in. She's in favor.
Thanks, Cheryl. Yes, please. And if you see anyone else on the list in that category, we'll do that.
I have Elizabeth Hayes signed up for in favor and neither. So I'm not sure which one she is.
All right.
I have Sarah, I'm sorry. I have Sarah Hewitt signed up for neither, but she's got her hand raised in the attendee room.
Okay. Can bring her in too and just go in order. All right, I'm gonna start with Spalding and then go to the following two names, which I'll find by then.
Should I go ahead? Good afternoon, Senator Dill, Representative O'Neill, and members of the ACF committee. My name is Heather Spalding, and I'm Deputy Director of the Maine Organic Farmers and Gardeners Association, MOFGA, and I'm speaking today in support of LD 1942. MOFGA Certification Services certifies 12 hemp operations under the USDA National Organic Program. We require thorough record keeping for our certified organic hemp producers. And we also have an independent third-party verification and certification program called Certified Clean Cannabis by MOFGA. MC3 is the acronym. And that is geared to medical caregivers and adult use producers who are striving to provide the safest and best quality products in the market. So we have 22 certified producers in that program. Last year, we testified in support of LD 33, as we were and are committed to rebuilding a local and organic future for cannabis and hemp production in Maine. And over time, it became clear, I fully acknowledge this, that federal hemp licensing requirements created significant challenges for some growers in Maine, and that some of the requirements were overly restrictive and, in our opinion, unjust. Many of the hemp growers have consistently expressed how challenging it is to limit levels of THC to 0.3%, and they've asked to raise that limit to 1%. Some of the growers had wished to maintain geographic anonymity for their crop production, and there was concern from individuals wishing to grow a few hemp plants for personal use, not to be licensed by USDA. We believe that they should not have to be licensed. And we're also very concerned about laws that prevent former felons from engaging in production of a legal and important agricultural product. We really appreciate that this bill offers a path forward for hemp producers who wish to grow and sell here in Maine, but may not meet the USDA rule requirements. We feel that these producers play a critical role in rebuilding the local hemp sector. We also recognize that the proposed parallel state-run program will be off limits for hemp growers who wish to sell their product outside of Maine, and or who wish to gain organic certification under the National Organic Program. Our certification program is USDA accredited certifying agency, and we're held to the standards of the federal government. So the regulatory requirements of USDA would preclude us from certifying hemp that did not carry a USDA license. And we want to err on the side of caution for that licensing, but we want to do everything we can to help Maine's hemp sector rebuild and flourish. And we don't want to mince words about the need to address unjust and unreasonable laws. This resistance is what has created thriving cannabis and hemp industries across the country. So we really want to keep moving forward, and we appreciate that this legislation offers a creative solution for moving the greater effort forward. And we think that other states will follow Maine's lead. So thank you so much for your careful consideration of this matter.
Sorry, I thought I was pressing on mute. Thank you for your testimony. Do I see any questions from committee members? I have one. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the 1% change and what you've heard from your members about how that would be helpful, what it would mean, that kind of thing.
Yes. So what my understanding is that in our climate in Maine, it's a challenging. It's becoming more and more challenging with the dramatically changing weather patterns, and that it's very difficult to keep that to limit the THC level to 0.3%. And Gary was talking about maybe the strategy or the desirability of having that higher level and being able to extract more CBD from the product. I think that's what he said. But I don't know that part of it. What I have heard is just it's more like it's just logistically more challenging to keep it at that level. And also that 1% is not a major concern for like safety or psychoactive problems or kids getting into it and having a really terrifying experience or something like that. It seems that the 1% is reasonable.
Okay, thank you for that. Any other questions? All right, seeing none, I'm going to look at the next person on the list. Thank you for your testimony. I'm seeing. Can we bring in the against folks? It looks like a handful there.
Sure. Would you like me to send the others back?
I don't see anyone on my screen. It might be my settings. I only have video on, folks showing up.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Someone messaged to say they're neither for nor against, and typically we do.
Yeah, they did. They are. So I will send in Thomas Arters is against, and Erica Haywood is against. I'll send them in.
Okay. Thanks, Cheryl.
I'm going to put the others back if that's okay.
Sure. Thanks, Cheryl. All right, I see Erica, so I'll welcome her up first.
Thank you, Representative O'Neill, Senator Dill, and distinguished committee members. Thank you for having me today. I'm Erica Haywood, representing hemp farmers, hemp processors, and product manufacturers here in Maine. My hemp company, Love Grown Agricultural Research LLC, was among the very first few in Maine to grow hemp crop as by the acre back in 2017. We also launched our nationally distributed product line in early 2018. And we were among the very first farmers to transition from MOFGA's MC3 cannabis certification program, which we helped develop and pilot, to full-on organic certification for not just our hemp crops and products, but for our diversified farm crops and value-added products as well. I'm here testifying against this bill today because if it passes, the operations of my business, as well as many other established hemp businesses in Maine, will have to change. In short, we do not plan to farm hemp again in Maine without a path to federal compliance. Without LD 33 in place, as of January 1st of this year, there is no compliant program for farmers here in Maine. And with this bill, we're walking a path to become the only state in our nation to even consider having a rogue hemp program. Hemp farmers already have restricted access to basic banking services due to a perceived risk of federal noncompliance. This bill, if passed, would seal the deal, making banking impossible. Not only that, but hemp farmers who already face obstacles when it comes to access to farm funding sources would see abrupt, impassable barriers to such funding erected immediately. So things like NRCS grants for greenhouses and even novel grant funding sources such as the current AIIP grant would be completely out of reach. In fact, as of January 1st of this year, I've had to form a new LLC for our farm to encompass all of our non-hemp farming related activities, current and projected, so that we may have access to the AIIP grant and other funding opportunities and establish basic banking services. I would urge everyone to review the potential pros of Maine licensing hemp as a USDA compliant program put forward by Mary and Gary at the ACF in December in the LD 33 Hemp Resolve report. That absolutely is the best option. Maine licensed hemp farmers don't want to become marijuana farmers in the eyes of the federal government, which will happen once this law passes. Experienced hemp farmers and processors like us have been preparing for the 0.3% threshold for many years now. We trust our current plan and our current program and our current regulators to help us move Maine forward in an industry that's already kind of unsteady underfoot sometimes. We grow and sell other crops. We want and need access to all USDA programs and benefits. Please help us to find a viable path forward for this industry by rejecting this bill and adopting quickly the original version of LD 33 as written. Let's give hemp farmers a fighting chance. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much for your testimony. I see a hand up from Representative Blucher.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for being here, Ms. Haywood. Would you be open to being certified by the USDA if you had the opportunity to be?
Well, we will take that path if we choose to grow hemp in the future and Maine passes this bill. We are absolutely concerned that having dual programs like this will make it very confusing for other states who would want to accept our products into interstate commerce. It would be hard for them to tell the difference between which where are you licensed? I think it'll put Maine in a very, very unique category if this bill were to pass.
And what are the hemp products that you grow?
But we grow our own varietals or unique cultivars of hemp, which we've grown and tested and bred over the last 5 years. And we produce a full line of processed hemp products, including ingestibles and topicals.
So you grow hemp for CBD, and then you also do the processing yourself, and you don't export. I'm guessing, but you correct me. You don't export raw hemp, but you do the processing yourself and you export the product. Is that true?
No, we have sold raw hemp to stores in other states as well.
Okay, so you do processing, and you do also sell the raw product.
Yes, we're certified organic for processed products as well as raw product.
Great. And then, and your LLC that you formed, what do you produce there?
Well, we're having to lump all of our non-hemp related farming activities, including value-added products, under that new LLC in order to become eligible for grants like the AIIP grant. So for example, my bakery, we would like to expand that, and it's non-hemp related activities, and all of the organic vegetables and apples and berries and herbs and flowers we grow, that kind of thing.
Great. I think those are all my questions. Thanks so much.
All right. Do I see any other questions? I have one. Ms. Hayward, can you talk a little bit about your business model, about the business you do in the state, about what you do out of state, and also talk about your opinion on that 1% matter as an industry member? I'm just curious, because I know that folks are advocating for that on the federal level, but what's the importance of that?
Well, I think access to genetics, good genetics, is the very basis of being compliant from that 0.3% total THC threshold all the way up to the 1% total THC. I know that some states before this January 1st kind of hard and fast deadline for having compliant programs were allowing hemp up to 1%, states like Vermont, for example. But Vermont, adopted their federally compliant plan as of December. We're really kind of the last one to be eyeing this 1% like it's feasible. And, Shelley Pingree did a great job by putting forward some federal legislation, kind of toying with that idea on the federal level, which we would of course support. But I think the feds have to go first, quite honestly, when it comes to putting farmers first and our needs forward.
Thank you. So I've taken some time, and others have taken some time to meet with Representative Pingree and raise those concerns. I think we know how long Congress takes to do just about anything. And we also know that we wouldn't have this program in the first place if we hadn't broken the federal law starting in 1997. So I think that's important to know what ground we're standing on here. I see a hand up from Representative Kluger.
Sorry, I did have one more question. It was around currently the Maine hemp program is self-sustaining through fees and stuff, but we're projected to not be self-sustaining within a year or two, if I'm remembering Mr. Fish's testimony correctly. Do you feel like, as a representative of the hemp industry, open to that kind of continuing as being a self-sustaining program in terms of raising fees and that sort of thing?
Well, I think that if the program were to continue under LD 33's passage and become federally compliant, I think farmers who were hesitant to farm this past year and this coming year are going to come forward and pay their licensing fees again. And I think the program will continue to be self-sustaining without having to grow if we can become federally compliant. And like I mentioned, I and the majority of hemp farmers I know would far and away prefer to be regulated by our state, the ACF. They know us, we know them, they know our unique concerns and agronomic practices here and how it affects compliance too.
Thank you so much.
All right. Not seeing any other questions, so thanks so much for your testimony. And I'm looking at the next person, who is Mr. Arders.
Thank you. Distinguished and esteemed members of the committee, I appreciate your time today. I'm here today with my partner, Tom Davis, head of farming for Prospect Farms, who is a multi-generational farmer from Central Maine. As founder, I represent Prospect Farms, a 4-year omni-channel business, brand, and distributor, supporting a robust portfolio of products both domestically and abroad. As a key stakeholder in the industry, I represent over 22% of the acreage planted in 2021. And I appreciate the opportunity to share my opinion in the support of a fruitful advancement of the industrial hemp industry and the e-commerce associated. I support a homogeneous, uniform approach to regulation. I believe a lack of uniform adherence to the USDA-approved program will be prohibitory in some part for the industry in Maine to achieve proper access, tools, and support, either presently or in the future, with regard to the advancement and progress of this industry in a federalized capacity, which I believe was the intention throughout the deregulation stemming from the 2014 Farm Bill. And understand that we've come a long way. I believe the industry and the support of the government has also equally come a long way, which I am grateful for our ability to adhere to a standardized program to support the future direction of this industry. Any natural progression of this industry, I believe, will undoubtedly require oversight from the USDA and adherence to risk mitigation measures to ensure the safety and security of not only the industry itself, but the key participants within that industry. I do not believe the ramifications beyond hemp licensure have been fully considered by all of my peers as it relates to the downstream effects of the currently proposed legislation, notably including an expanded and lax approach to THC testing limitations, authorized up to 1% THC, which in the current state is not supported at the federal level, as we're all aware. I believe reasons stated for lax THC limitation testing limits are not well founded, and I believe the hemp and cannabis industries would stand to greater flourish if kept mutually exclusive as they have been designed to exist at the current state. And I believe this compromised testing level would potentially lead to issues therein. I believe what is currently considered is a quasi-cannabis law approach to regulation and may compromise both the integrity of the industrial hemp program as it pertains to an interstate commerce, which I believe to be a vital and necessary component to a healthy and regulated industry, as well as the state's ability to both regulate and successfully audit and tax the cannabis industry. What I believe may transpire if the THC limitations are relaxed, it would be a compromised ability of federal and state regulators to monitor, regulate, and support both the industrial hemp and the cannabis industries in an exclusive capacity. It may lead to a reduction in taxable revenues in the cannabis industry for the state and thus weaken the state's ability to properly manage and support the industry, and potentially force the commercial hemp business to potentially relocate facilities, jobs, and resources out of state if the proper access is not provided over time, leading to a further erosion of the industry and unfortunately a prohibitory access for small businesses within the industry. Thank you for your time and allowing me to speak.
Thank you for your testimony. Do I see any questions from folks? See a hand up from Representative Booker.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks for being here, Mr. Arders. You said 22, you think you've heard from the department that you're 22% of the growth of hemp in the state of Maine is through your business?
I'm speaking to the 2021 growing season, as it was stated and shared very kindly by Mr. Fish's office. 67 acres were planted in 2021, which would put our business at just over 22% of the planted acreage in 2021.
Oh, okay. So that was my next question. Was it what's your total acreage? But you're saying 22% of 67. So I'm
yes, 15 acres to be specific.
Yeah. Great. Thank you. And then I had the same question around fees. So if we're going to kind of maintain our own program that's USDA facilitated, and then if we're going to maintain it kind of sustaining itself, and you mentioned, income and lack of revenue and those kinds of things, would you be open to increase fees in order to maintain the integrity of the program?
I think it's a wonderful consideration. I think like any program that is managed in the respects of self-sustainability, like any business would be in their own right, I believe it warrants consideration around what that industry and framework and all the support associated looks like. to understand what those expenses are so that we could ultimately solve for the fees to support that industry. I believe we as stakeholders have a responsibility not only for our own businesses, but for the industry itself to ensure the sustainability of this emerging industry.
Okay, I think I got from that you feel you have a responsibility for sustaining it and you'd be open to whatever needed to be done. Is that true?
Yes, Representative. I believe that's a pretty fair statement, with the adherence to understanding what the complexities of those fees are and having also an equal say in that in some capacity, so that it's not left unadulterated.
Thank you.
All right. Any other questions for Mr. Arders? All right, seeing none. Cheryl, could we please bring in the remaining folks on this?
Yeah, I have Tom Davis is on the list. I'm not sure if he wants to speak. He's sitting next to Mr. Otters.
Oh, gotcha. Yeah, they're on the same screen. I wasn't sure. All set. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your.
Thank you.
All right.
So here comes Elizabeth Hayes.
Oh, this is me. I think my settings make it so I can't see people unless their screen is on. I'd like to welcome up Sarah Hewitt, please.
Sarah Hewitt. And Elizabeth Hayes is a neither, as well as Jeffrey is a neither.
Welcome. Thanks for being here today. Can start.
Hi. Yeah, thanks for having me. And thank you to the members of the Agriculture Committee for having this hearing today. My name is Sarah Hewitt, and I'm a farmer in Union who has been cultivating hemp since 2018 as part of my diversified farm plan. And while I morally support the total THC level being raised to 1% for the overall good of the hemp industry, I realize that there are ripple effects that such a change will have in this industry. The change would lead to potential banking issues, as Gary spoke about earlier. It would impact my ability to apply for various federal grants, as Erica spoke about earlier. And it would also impact my ability to sell any hemp products, either raw or manufactured across state lines. And in taking into consideration a bill recently submitted on the federal level by Shelley Pingree, which would address the increase in THC levels, as well as other objectionable aspects of the USDA hemp regulation, I would be in favor of tabling this bill to see where federal support and of Shelley Pingree's bill would lie. And that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. I see a hand up from Representative Blucher.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for being here, Sarah, Ms. Hewitt, my constituent. So if this bill were to pass and you were to be, would you then choose to be a USDA certified next year so that you could ship out of state?
I would have to look at my current, I'd have to, I guess, measure my current sales versus any potential in-state contracts that I might have and weigh where that lies. And this is the time of year that I'm doing that anyway. And at this point, I might go with the USDA just with the state managing the program, just because some of the interesting points that Gary Fish brought up, knowing that we also cultivate cannabis on our farm in addition to hemp, that would definitely be an alarmist sort of situation for me.
Right, totally. Got it. Thank you very much.
Yep.
All right, next, hand up from Representative Osher.
Thank you so much for being here and giving your testimony. I'm new to this committee. This is my first legislative session, and so I understand there's so much involved, and you doing agriculture and getting support for the work that you do and getting loans. So could you tell me about the banking issues with growing these products historically, and how is it now?
Yeah. In my experience, I've actually been really lucky to work with my local bank, which is not a credit union. And they initially did not want to work with me as a hemp business, strictly because they didn't really understand what the difference between medical cannabis, adult use, and hemp. And after some education and actually doing a fair amount of digging on the federal level to send them information, then they were willing to work with me. It's still a very dicey situation for me in that I have to go in for an annual review, which other businesses don't have to do. I do have a product line that I create off of the hemp that I grow. And that business is a totally separate LLC. It's a totally separate business, banking, record keeping sort of situation. So my bank will work with me if I produce raw products. If I produce manufactured products, then that has to be a whole different business for me. So there's a thin line there, but I have been able to receive grants as a result of being able to stay under that 0.3% federal THC threshold. So.
And how would this bill change that?
So this bill would clearly diverge from the federally accepted 0.3% THC limit, and would put us into a 1% THC limit, which effectively in the state of Maine is medical marijuana. I would lose my banking for my agricultural entity, essentially. And by the sounds of it, could potentially be reported because at that point, I'm not falling into a federal program. I'm also not falling into the medical marijuana program. I'm in an amorphous zone made up by the state.
So as a grower, I mean, what I hear is part of this is that it's hard with the fluctuations in the moisture content and rainfall to actually stay below the threshold that's designed now. And my guess is that as climate changes, that throughout the country, people who are doing the same kind of agriculture you are going to be running up against those things. And either again, I'm new in this and I wasn't involved in the wording of this bill, but either everyone's experiencing it, and Maine is, as we have done in the past, being a leader and saying, this actually doesn't work, the numbers we have, because of the way our environment is and the challenges of growing these crops. And so either Maine's being a leader because we are the first to experience it, because somehow our climate is making it so that we're the first to experience it, or Maine is being a leader because everyone's experiencing, and we're kind to put something into our laws to protect I don't know if it's protect, to make this a known quantity. So I would like to be the kind of legislator that doesn't tamp down things just because no one else is doing it. I want to be the kind of legislator that supports things that are helping our farmers do what needs to be done so that they can in the future flourish. And one of those things might be these are basically flags for the banking system. So is there a way that you can imagine? You said you're neither for nor against, but from your past experience of working with banks, is there a way you can imagine that this could be a signal for a better future for you as a farmer?
I would have to look, I guess, at the medical marijuana program to find out if Maine forging a way for medical marijuana caregivers to get banking is it any easier for them, because Maine has made an avenue for them. And I don't believe that it is. I really appreciate that perspective that you come with, because I am right there with you, and I totally feel if somebody needs to make a stand, and I stand firmly behind Shelley Pingree's federal federal proposal bill. But yeah, to answer your question, I'm not sure that I could imagine a way. I guess I would have to open up a bank account where every medical marijuana caregiver might open a bank account, but banks aren't opening new accounts. So that's just my personal situation.
Any follow-up questions?
No, thank you.
So I think that's something that would be helpful for the public hearing. I mean, for the work session. If anyone listening is a caregiver or could provide information on financing for marijuana. Thanks for your testimony. And I see Elizabeth Hayes up next.
Can you hear me?
Is there a hand up from Representative Blucher, or is that just a Zoom moment? Sorry, Ms. Hayes.
No, I was just attempting to wave goodbye to Hewitt.
Okay, welcome. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me. My name is Elizabeth Hayes. I live in Mercer, and my husband and I have been growing hemp under Maine's hemp program since 2019. I initially submitted written testimony in favor of LD 1942, but after further consideration and greater understanding of how it would impact my farm and other folks that I know who are also, can you get that out of here? Who are also growing either medical or adult use cannabis, and how that could jeopardize their situation. I really think that the best way to protect and ensure success of hemp farmers in Maine is to maintain the continuity of the program by continuing to license through the state. I suspect that a lot of the growers and stakeholders at the meetings who supported a rogue program were similar to me, not quite understanding the full implication of how that might affect their business. I've really been happy working with the state, and it gives me pause to think about having to go through the USDA, because our contract that we grow for is organic certified. And so we would be forced to go through, if this bill was passed, we'd be forced to go through the USDA to get our organic certification. And I just want to mention that in the crops that we've grown, we have been able to keep below the current 0.3% total THC for almost every variety that we've grown. And so I don't believe that it's true that it's difficult in Maine to be compliant to that federal limit. I think that it's the farmers have a potential for an increased yield at the higher THC threshold. And so while I wholeheartedly support the intent and content of this bill in principle, I think that those are the right ways for a hemp program to be. I think that the best thing for Maine farmers is to be able to continue to work with Gary and Mary, who understand our concerns and are responsive and helpful, and are going to be better to deal with than the USDA, who says that over 3.5 is criminal negligence, and are viewing this in a different light than the people of our state, who understand the difference, truly understand the difference between marijuana and hemp. So I think that's everything I have to say. And thank you for taking my input.
Thanks for your testimony and making the time to be here. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about your current business model and what it looks like. And if we did make a dual licensing scheme, where would you choose to go? What would be the best option for you as a business?
Sure. I don't really feel like we have a choice. We would have to go through the USDA, because we are growing a contract for a Maine company that wants a USDA certified product, or an organic certified product. We're certified through MOFGA, but they would not be able to certify us organic if this was passed. And we, for us, we would lose access to the state licensing, which we would much prefer. I don't know what it's going to be like to get licensed through USDA when there is no USDA certified testing lab in the state, and there is no, I don't know who would be coming to do the testing. And I could imagine that currently I feel confident that we could meet that 0.3% total THC threshold, but if we contacted the USDA to test our crop, and then there was a holdup and they couldn't come when we needed them to, and that got held up, that timeline could make it so that we weren't compliant and would have to destroy our crop. So that's something that I would be fearful about if I had to work with the USDA, having never done that before. Whereas I'm confident that we can be compliant if we're working with the state.
That's helpful information for me. I have a question for you, the same that I posed to the first person about the history of the program. I think what's tough is the whole reason that we're able to have this industry is because we have stood up for, moving forward with our laws. So what do you think about pushing for 1%, not having the background checks to farm, being able to maintain personal plants?
Yeah, I
And
understand.
willingness to kind of push for that.
Yeah. Well, I'm also a medical caregiver, and so I would love to be in a program that for the hemp that is USDA like compliant and federally condoned, because it's exhausting to be working in the medical industry where it's such a gray area. And I totally understand that intent and that desire to push back against the prohibition of felons growing of cannabis. Like, I don't think that that's right. That's why I originally say that I'm not for or against this bill. In principle, I understand the intent of the bill, but I think a better path is to hope that the amendments that Shelley Pinnegree is proposing for the Farm Bill are to go through, and that we can all sort of just hold our nose for a couple years of growing crop under a state-run USDA program, rather than creating a situation where all Maine hemp growers could be looked at as suspect under a federal lens. And I just don't want to complicate anything for anyone who's in the Maine adult use or medical program, where they're going to end up in some sort of hot water, when I think that we're all looking for something that's very straightforward and simple, and access to banking. I mean, even as a hemp producer, we weren't able to get an account with our personal bank. We had to get with a different bank, and then for our medical, we have to have a separate bank from that. And it is very difficult to have all these different programs. So I feel like having just one state-run program would be my preference. And it sounds like there aren't a lot of hemp growers that are advocating for this change, because we've all already been in the gray area for so long that we'd like to keep working with the state, because we know what to expect, and we know that they know what to expect from us. If that answers your question.
It does. I had a couple, but then you switched topics, so I'm trying to remember. Could you talk a little bit more about your banking related to your to cannabis?
For the medical? So I only have one bank in the state that I can use. There's 2 banks in the state that I know of that will work with medical growers, and I believe there are 3 that will work with adult use. It's easier, as I understand, to get a bank account if you have adult use, because it's got stricter regulations, whereas the medical regulations are still sort of in the rulemaking process for a lot of points. And so there's only 2 banks that we can work with. They charge us extra compliance fees every month, $50 a month, because it's a cannabis company. It's difficult to get a payroll service to work with us without them charging extra fees. It's just being considered. I would think that if someone chose to go, if there was a rogue program, a parallel program in Maine, and a farmer wanted to grow hemp under the 1% Maine program, that they would be probably by the banks considered a marijuana company, and have a difficult time getting access to banking and payroll services and different sorts of business services, insurance, because it would be a federally illegal product that they're growing. So.
Okay. Thanks for that background information. And I think my last question is just about how do we square accepting background checks to farm?
I don't know. Yeah, I mean,
I guess. How do you square asking for that?
Yeah, I already have to do that in the medical. I have to get a background check if I want someone to work on the farm. They have to get a background check, which I don't think is right. I mean, teenagers in the state can be bartenders, but I can't hire a teenager to like prune my plants or move compost on my farm. So I don't think it's right. I guess I'm just speaking specifically to what I, as a hemp grower, would choose in this situation. Is I would choose to continue to interface with the state, who has an understanding and acceptance of cannabis as not an illicit drug, rather than having to work with the USDA, who is part of a federal government that does not view it the same way. And so that's, for me, the part that I would be uncomfortable with, is having to interface with the USDA directly. But I understand that concern, and I certainly hope that Shelley Pinnegree is successful in getting that amended and changed.
Thanks for your testimony.
Thank you.
All right, next up I see Jeffrey Nozick. I hope I've said that right.
Hi, it's
Hi, welcome.
it's no such, but thank you. That's I appreciate the time. Me and Elizabeth, who was just on, we run Panorama Hemp, so she's pretty much said everything for the most part. But I wanted to just show up and say that we have thought about this a lot. I gave testimony. I showed up to give testimony to Mary and Gary several times. I spoke to Mary last night even about this, and we were signed up for nor against, initially for even, but realizing the ramifications of what's actually going to go down, we felt like this was throwing the baby out with the bathwater. And sort of specifically in regards to the background checks, obviously nobody wants that. We are against it, of course, 100%. But I don't think it actually would affect anyone in our program. So now it may, of course, affect someone who's not in the program now but wants to join. I'm hoping the federal bill will correct that problem. But currently, it would just kind of be putting all the people who have been, kind of putting all their efforts into this program. And, this is our business. We rely on this. We're trying to buy seeds right now and trying to square up contracts right now and don't even know what to expect. And then if this bill passes, then we really don't know what to expect. So we get into pretty nerve-wracking territory for something that is ideal. Absolutely, it would be ideal if we could have all of the things in the bill, but I don't think we can have our cake and eat it too currently. And that's why I support maybe tabling this idea and waiting to see if the federal government does go along with Shelley Pingree's proposal. And if it doesn't, then maybe starting this conversation again and saying, okay, there are some people in our state who want to participate in a different program. Let's talk about doing that again, maybe. Another thing I just wanted to address really quick was something Representative Osher said. She had the understanding that maybe climate was affecting this proposal, or maybe that, climatic changes are affecting this proposal. I don't think it really has to do with that. Maine is at a disadvantage in the hemp industry to some degree because our climate is colder and wetter, but it's always been that way. And increasing the yield on your crop is always good for someone who's in a disadvantage. So theoretically, yes, it would be, but I don't think that's due to a changing climate so much as it is just due to just the very nature of growing any crop in Maine. It needs to sort of be high value and you have a short season to grow it. So that's kind of how we put those pieces together. I'm happy to answer any other questions. I have a pretty good understanding of all the hemp THC related ratio issues and how they could be changed and how they could be viewed differently. And I'm here happy to share whatever anybody wants to know. Thank you.
Thanks for your testimony, Representative Blucher.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. being here. I just wanted to ask, I don't think I got it from Elizabeth. How many acres of hemp do you grow? How many acres of crops do you grow in general? And how many folks do you employ?
We grow a quarter acre of hemp the past 3 years, and we are planning to grow, not really sure, but maybe up to a half of an acre of hemp this year. We grow it all based on contracts. So we get a contract for a certain amount of pounds and we grow that many pounds and grow however much we need to. And we last year had just the two of us and a couple other people that we'd bring in for a few days here and there, and one solid employee that we hired on for a longer stretch of time.
And
next year, we're kind of thinking we would contract out with a group of people that would help us with harvest, though. So maybe just like a larger group would be contracted separately. So a contractor to do that.
How many acres do you crop total?
We grow that, and we have a medical marijuana farm. We're expanding into garlic next year. So the quarter acre that we grew last year is going to be planted with garlic next year. So we're hoping to grow like an acre, maybe potentially in the future, of crops that get rotated in quarter acre plots. And we have a separate LLC for medical marijuana that's grown on a separate piece of property. All of which, does play into this a little bit. I actually know a farmer who would probably want to be certified organic for his hemp. And he also grows medical marijuana on the same property. And so he would be, if that hemp crop needed to be organic for him to sell it, then he'd have to invite the possibility of a USDA inspector coming to that farm and looking around and being like, I'm going to tell somebody about this. And I think that would just mean for them that they would just drop it and be like, nah, I can't do that. I can't risk that. So, much as I love these proposals, I just don't know who this is going to help, honestly.
Just a quick, I'm more trying to get a sense of scale.
Okay.
Is that
we're on a small scale.
Your community, excuse me?
We're a small scale farm.
Yes, I got that. But
Yeah.
in your community of like folks, I'm sure friends and folks in the area who are growing on your same scale. Like how many folks in your area are growing the same scale, growing hemp, or I guess I'm asking specifically about hemp, not cannabis.
Just a few that I know of
Okay.
on that scale. I know another farmer that's a little farther away that does 1 to 3 acres. I know Thomas who does a larger scale farm, and our area kind of has a lot of the farms in it, but I only know a few of them that are kind of at our scale.
Great, thank you very much.
Yeah.
All right, seeing no more questions, thanks for your time and thanks for being here.
Thank you.
And I'm looking at our list to see, Cheryl, is there anyone else?
That's it.
That's it?
That's it.
All right, thanks. So that concludes the public hearing on 1942. And I'm wondering if committee members have any information requests or anything they want to talk about before we move to the next item. All right, seeing none, I'm going to pass the gavel back to Chair Dill for the public hearing on 1944.
Thanks, Representative O'Neill. I'll open up the hearing on LD 1944, an act to provide State Harness Racing Commission greater efficacy and rules enforcement. And to present is Representative Dunphy, if she's here. And would you also let in Henry Jennings and Dawn Marian, please?
Representative Dunphy was here, but she's not here now.
All right.
He had a
But
conflict and I said I would present if she wasn't here. So I'm going to look at my email to see if there's testimony, and there is. Okay.
All right, then I will turn to Representative O'Neill to present the bill.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, Senator Dill, Representative O'Neill, and esteemed members of the Agriculture, Conservation, and Forestry. I'm Michelle Dunphy, represent Old Town. I'm here today to present LD 1944, an act to provide the State Harness Racing Commission greater efficiency in rules enforcement. The Maine Harness Racing Commission is charged with enforcing its statutes and rules. In the past, they have resolved violations via consent agreements. However, the Attorney General's office has recently questioned whether the use of consent agreements is in conflict with the statute. This bill would codify the State Harness Racing Committee's ability to enter into consent agreements to resolve violations of the laws related to harness racing. There are a handful of primary drivers behind the Commission's current push to utilize consent agreements whenever possible. Expediency is one of them. The Commission places great value on resolving violations quickly, and without the ability to resolve violations through consent agreements, this process is delayed. Another is the length of adjudicatory hearings. In some cases, hearings can last for more than a day, and considering that commissioners are volunteers, many of whom have jobs, devoting this much time to a hearing makes it extremely difficult to recruit and retain commissioners. Finally, without having consent agreements as an avenue, the Commission would be forced to shift its focus and energy away from developing strategies aimed at ensuring continuation of the sport in Maine. Our harness racing industry contributes to rural and agricultural economies, which have not benefited proportionately from recent economic gains. I'm sure you will hear of other reasons this bill is needed from Commission members today, and I hope the committee will agree that this bill is needed and will vote to support the harness racing communities across our state. Thank you for your time. I am not happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Representative Dunphy. Any questions for Representative O'Neill? All right, moving right along. Next up is Henry Jennings. Welcome.
Good afternoon. Just want to do a sound check first to make sure you can hear me.
Yes, we can.
Okay, because sometimes I have to put my headphones on. Thank you. So, good afternoon, Senator Dill, Representative O'Neill, and distinguished members of the committee. My name is Henry Jennings, and I'm the Executive Director for the Maine State Harness Racing Commission. And today I'm speaking in support of LD 1944. The Commission statute, specifically Title 8, Section 279-B, currently contains a clause that raises questions about the Commission's authority to levy fines, except through adjudicatory hearings. The specific language says that for the Commission to levy, it can only levy a fine after issuing notice and conducting a hearing for violations of this chapter or the rules. Essentially, it's limiting our ability to collect fines to adjudicatory hearings based on that particular language. Fines are far and away the most common sanction levied by the Commission and by many licensing agencies. That's how a lot of violations are resolved. Consent agreements are by far the most common method employed throughout state government, especially by licensing agencies, and they provide ample due process for the parties involved. They are preferable to adjudicatory hearings because they have a series of advantages for both the licensing agency and the alleged violator. LD 1944 will allow the Commission to broaden its authority to levy fines through consent agreements. And nobody has to do a consent agreement. There's always the option to go through an adjudicatory process if as a licensee you don't agree with any of the terms of a consent agreement. So to go through some of the advantages, clearly Representative Dunphy and I were working off the same script. We want to resolve cases quickly, and the primary reason why we want to resolve cases quickly is because sometimes there is a purse payment that has gone to a licensee that essentially is disqualified. And historically, many of these cases were resolved very quickly so that the purse could be redistributed to the person who it was intended, should rightfully go to. Through adjudicatory hearings, this can be a very long and drawn out process. I've got two cases from May of 2021 that I probably could have resolved within a month if I had the ability to resolve them through consent agreements. They still aren't resolved. There have been serial continuances of the hearings, and then we ran into some issues with a law court ruling that I'll discuss briefly. Some of these adjudicatory hearings can be very long, and that's a problem for both the commission, the staff, and the licensees. We recently had one that took 7 hours to adjudicate a single violation. And what that means is that I've got commissioners that have day jobs, and they've got to take vacation time to sit through these adjudicatory hearings, and it makes it difficult to recruit commissioners. It's also a problem on the other side of the coin for the licensees. Typically, we will try to lump adjudicatory hearings into one meeting for efficiency purposes, and sometimes we may have 4 or 5 cases on a single agenda. That could tie up an entire day for a licensee who would have to take a day off too. There are a whole series of benefits to consent agreements, and the primary one I would say is how much effort, time, and cost is involved in resolving a violation. I would venture that conducting an adjudicatory hearing has about a 10-to-1 ratio in the amount of time that just the department has to devote to solving or resolving a violation, as opposed to through a consent agreement. Again, going back to the cases from last May, I've scheduled them 3 times and they still haven't been heard. And the process of just scheduling these and getting the notice of hearing out, which is a very complicated document, and all of the other legal documents involved, is just incredibly time consuming. Consent agreements provide greater flexibility in addition to the relative terms of the resolution for both parties, which makes it easier to resolve cases in which the parties don't agree on every nuance. They're never mandatory, however, and any time that a licensee doesn't agree with what's being proposed, they can opt for an adjudicatory hearing. Another issue is trying to schedule the hearings. Right now, you've got to find a meeting room. You've got to juggle the schedule of the commissioners. You've got to juggle the schedule of the department employees. You've got to look at the availability of the Office of the Attorney General, and pretty soon we're going to also be looking at hiring a hearing officer. So that would be 5 parties really that you'd have to coordinate and get into one hearing. And hearing officers are very hard to schedule because they're in great demand. And then finally, skip down to the cost. If we have to hire hearing officers to conduct adjudicatory hearings, then it's an additional cost. And every time I incur an additional cost to the operation of the program, I have to take it out of the casino slot revenue that comes from Bangor. And there are 5 recipients of that casino slot revenue that essentially will be impacted by that, because every dollar that I spend to operate the program is a dollar that's not available to those recipients. 62% of that slot revenue goes into purse money. And so, the horsemen would be adversely and disproportionately impacted. So those are the reasons why the department contends it's critical to have the option to resolve violations through consent agreements, which LD 1944 would facilitate. I urge the committee to pass LD 1944. I do need to make one point that I'm hoping Karen is listening for, because the Office of the Attorney General has contacted me to let me know that they believe we should strike 3 words from the bill language. And those 3, and a comma, those 3 words are the alleged violator, comma. And I can't give you the best explanation as to why they feel that's problematic, but I don't see how it would negatively impact our ability to work with the language. So that is something that I think I'll contact Karen afterwards, but that's a very minor change that we would propose. So that's all I have for testimony. I would be glad to answer any questions now or at the work session.
Thank you. Representative O'Neill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Jennings, for your testimony. I would like you to go over situations where you would use a consent agreement versus an adjudicatory hearing. Can you just explain? I need a hypothetical to have any of what you said make sense.
Okay, so the most common circumstance would be a violation of what's called the prohibited substances rules, and those are when we test all of the we test 2 horses after every race, and we test horses before the race for different compounds. So I wish I had the number in front of me, but we do an awful lot of testing of the horses to make sure that there's no performance enhancing substances found in those horses in the bloodstream. So there are literally thousands of compounds that you might find, and they all come out in different categories of severity or concern. But many of those cases, they're all pretty much prescribed by rule what the resolution should be, and so the licensee can look at the rule, and if they're willing to admit that the horse did have a substance in its blood at the time that it raced, then I can resolve those very quickly, and then the purse can be redistributed quickly by a consent agreement. So that would be the most common one. There might be other cases that would just involve other violations of state harness racing rules. Those are less common, but it's most common to apply the consent agreements with prohibited substance violations, and that's a good way to do them because it's quick. And then that purse money that somebody won but is technically disqualified after the fact is not sitting in their account. It goes to the rightful recipient of the purse money.
Thank you. And a follow-up, please, Mr. Chair.
Sure.
Can you help me understand the difference of how a consent agreement operates versus an adjudicatory hearing? An adjudicatory hearing, I'm assuming, is in public, whereas a consent agreement could potentially be private. Can you explain how that might work in practice?
Well, I think you negotiate a consent agreement with a licensee, and you don't do that in public. But if you're able to reach agreement with a licensee on a proposed consent agreement, then you still have to take it public. So it's not like you're burying or hiding the violation. You still have to take it to a public meeting, and there's different ways for the commission to approach it. They can either decide that they want to approve each consent agreement, or they can approve a very prescriptive policy on how consent agreements are resolved. But either way, it needs to go on a public agenda, and so that there is light shed on the resolution of the violation. I don't know if that answered your question or not, but with an adjudicatory hearing, you've got to schedule a hearing, and then
I understand what you're saying about process. Just trying to get some more information, just to avoid repeating. What is what is different about a consent agreement in terms of what is available to public view? In an adjudicatory hearing, you'll have the entire process be public in terms of what's discussed, what will be hidden from view with a consent agreement.
Probably, I would. For me, the only thing is the actual discussions that you have over the phone, really, or in person, if you might. Of course, those are pretty hard to keep records of it. But at the end of the day, a consent agreement is essentially a contract, if you will, a written agreement between 2 parties, and that party is a public document. That agreement is a public document. And so when we put it on the agenda, it's going to, we're also going to put in general terms what the resolution was. The commissioners will have that, and then anybody has the right to request a copy of that agreement.
So what, just to get back to the question, what is different if you have an adjudicatory hearing, you can see exactly what the violator was charged with and then have a hearing about it, which is a public conversation. Our judicial process is important. And I'm wondering what's different about a consent agreement. Will you be able to see the original charge? You know, is there a potential to negotiate down and you don't know what the original charge was? I'm trying to understand better how the mechanics of this would work.
You know, I've got 35-year history with consent agreements. You always have to have a description of the facts and the law, essentially. So you have to say, well, what actions or conduct constituted a violation? You have to lay that out. And then what piece of law was violated? Now, the only potential difference is that there are times where, and I don't know that we've ever used this in harness racing, but there are times in a consent agreement where you can agree to disagree. You can agree that something happened, and that these you can disagree on interpretation of law. For instance, the state would say the facts above constitute a violation of the Maine State Harness Racing Commission rules and statutes. The licensee does not agree that it's a violation. That's happened before in my prior life. I've never had one of those in harness racing, but it allows you the opportunity where essentially when there's some gray area, if you will, and the state feels it's important to continue and to prosecute, that you can come to an agreement on a resolution where, you know, in an adjudicatory hearing, those are the kind of cases that typically will get appealed to Superior Court because there is some gray area in exactly whether the conduct or the actions constitutes a violation. But overall, you've still got a description of the conduct and a description of the law that the state believes was violated, and then the terms of settlement.
Thank you. And one last follow-up, Mr. Chair.
Sure.
Do you always see the original thing that the original violation the person was charged with? Or I think if you can understand what I'm getting at, what I'm worried about is that we only see that a settlement took place and we don't know what the original charge was and it perhaps was negotiated down. I'm just trying to get it, what might be missing.
Well,
or would we still see the original charge and we'd see a settlement, like potentially if a settlement was for something less? I don't know. I'm trying to understand.
I don't think it's like a plea bargain, if you will.
Okay.
I think it's more like, okay, we all agree this happened, so let's just settle it without spending all the time and expense. That's really more what it's about. If the licensee just doesn't agree with what the state is contending in terms of violation, that's going to go to an adjudicatory hearing. That's going to be, all of it's going to be in front of the public. I just don't think this idea that the original charge is going to get buried is anything that I've ever seen. Anyway, I just don't think that's a thing from my history. You know, that's going to be if there's disagreement about what at that level, you know, go to an adjudicatory hearing. I'm not sure.
So my last question is, if you've been doing this for 35 years, what has changed that has made you need to raise it now, I guess?
Well, I think there was, I can't tell you for sure, but we had to change our statute a little while ago because it didn't allow for a purse return. And I wonder if that was, I should do the history of, I wonder if that was when the language was changed slightly. But what I was in the midst of was trying to write up a policy that to give to the commissioners to say, this is how consent agreements will be negotiated and approved. I sent that Office of the Attorney General to have them review the document, and then they started this process of doing the statute review, and it yielded this concern that's focused right on, doesn't affect first suspensions, but only fines. So they felt it, in order to remove any question about whether or not this was in conflict with the statute, it was better to fix the statute. Most of the licensing agencies have very similar language to this right in their statutes.
Thank you. That's helpful. Just for the work session, could you please bring that history just to confirm it? I think that would be helpful for me to know where the issue arose and how we got here.
I'll do my best.
Thanks.
Representative Underwood.
One question for Mr. Jennings basically is, do you need an emergency rider on this for the upcoming season?
I would love an emergency rider on it. I know I thought of it after the bill had been printed, and I was told, no, you'll have to wait for the work session or whatever. But yes, it would be very helpful to get this in place sooner rather than later.
Mr. Chairman Dill, if I could just have a statement. Is it okay to go right into a work session from here in order to approve this bill?
I think there might be a little work to go on it still to some of the questions that's been asked. We could do that, but I would prefer not to at this time. I think you're right, though, it will probably be fairly simple once we come back to have the work session, but that'll just be in a week, so. It shouldn't make much bearing. Thank you, Representative. Any other questions for Mr. Jennings? Seeing none, I will close the hearing. I don't believe there's anybody else, is there, Cheryl?
Yeah, we have.
Sorry.
Barron.
I did not close the hearing. Oh, it's Dawn Marian. How could I forget you, Dawn? You know, Dawn, Senator Black keeps track of former members, and he hits them all up later and on for goodies.
Well, that'll be a problem today for sure.
Well, it would be today. That's why he keeps track of everybody, and he'll come knocking at your door or something. So
I'll put it on my list. So am
Okay.
I up now,
Close by,
sir?
just
you
saying.
are up.
Okay, well, good afternoon, everyone. Senator Dill and Representative O'Neill and distinguished members of the committee. I'm happy to be before the Ag Committee. I'm here to speak in favor of LD 1944. And I particularly thank Representative Dunphy for putting this bill in on behalf of the department and the industry. And I'm here to speak on behalf of the Maine Hunter Sportsmen's Association, of which I am a director, and its membership in support of this bill. It'll put another tool in the toolbox of the commission to be able to expedite violations and get them settled ASAP, get the people back to racing and get the money redistributed. If there had been a violation and money had been distributed, it would be redistributed to the proper people. So an emergency preamble would be very beneficial to this bill. If the committee can get to that point during the work session, it would be very helpful. And that's about all I have. I just want you to know that the industry, the horsemen, men and women, support this idea in being able to expedite violations. It will be very helpful to get us back racing. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony this afternoon.
Thank you.
Now, Cheryl, is there anybody else?
There is not.
All right, then I will close the hearing on LD 1944, an act to provide the State Harness Racing Commission greater efficiency in rules enforcement. And is there anything to come before us, Karen?
Yeah, I do have a couple of things for you to review.
All right.
So if you don't mind, I'll share my screen. I have the committee amendment to LD 1756. Resolve, the new title is Resolve Authorizing the Department of ACF to convey certain land in Penobscot County. I'm going to share my screen. So basically, it just amends the preamble because it refers to the other parcel in Aroostook County, and that has been stricken from the bill. And that was in section 1 of the bill. So we're striking out all of section 1 and leaving in place section 2, which is the conveyance of the parcel in Penobscot County to Baxter State Park. And then I just wanted to show you also the, there is a fiscal note for this. Pull that up. And it does say that there's a fiscal note required, but it doesn't put in an amount. Current biennium revenue increase to other special revenue funds, and then a current cost increase to Baxter State Park. But there is no dollar amount. So do you have, I did submit that through the portal, so you should have gotten an email with that information. Are there any questions?
Questions for Karen? Seeing none. Anything else, Karen?
Yeah, and then the second piece I have is this was a unanimous ought to pass report, but I did mention that there would be a fiscal note only amendment because there's an appropriations and allocations section in the bill. So these dollar amounts should be no surprise to you. This is for LD 1929, an act to provide assistance to areas severely infested with brown-tailed moths. So this information was already in the printed bill. So I just wanted to show you the fiscal note only amendment. Have any questions about that one?
Questions? Seeing none. Is that it for that
That's
part?
it.
All right. Cheryl, anything from you?
Nothing at all.
Let's see, what is today? Tuesday?
Mhm.
So we have chairs and leads after this.
Yes.
Okay. I have a motion to adjourn. Representative Landy, seconded by Representative Pluker. All in favor? Opposed? Thank you all. Chairs and leads, stay tuned, please.
You. Bye-bye.